What's up, guys? Welcome to Cursed Harry. We've got something special today. What if Harry collapsed at Gringots and woke up holding 50 lordship rings? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The weight of 50 hands. The queue at Gringots moved like a funeral procession, and Harry Potter had been standing in it for 11 minutes, which was 10 minutes longer than he'd budgeted for patience. He'd left Privet Ride at 4:30 in the morning, stuck out his wand arm on Magnolia Crescent, ridden the night bus with his forehead against the window and a headache behind his eyes, and stepped off into a diagon alley that hadn't properly woken up yet. Shutters half raised, an apothecary's boy dragging crates of something that smelled like wet pennies. The cobbles still dark from the street cleaning charms. Nobody had recognized him. That was the best part of the morning so far. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of letters that said we can't tell you anything, in Ron's handwriting and Hermione's handwriting, and once, insultingly, in Sirius's, which was the one that had made him put his fist through the side of the wardrobe. 3 weeks of watering Aunt Petunia's begonias and listening to the news for names he might recognize. If nobody was going to tell him anything, then fine. He'd go and find out things himself, and he was going to start with money, because money was the one thing in the wizarding world he actually had. Next, said the teller. Harry stepped up. The goblin didn't look at him. He was writing in a ledger with a quill so fine it made a sound like an insect walking. Withdrawal, Harry said. Vault 687. I've got my key. Name, Harry Potter. The quill stopped. It was such a small thing, a pause of maybe half a second. But Harry had spent 4 years watching people react to his name, and he'd got good at reading the shape of it. The flinch, the flush, the glance at his forehead. This wasn't any of those. The goblin's eyes came up slowly and went, not to his scar, but to his hands where they rested on the counter. Repeat it, the goblin said. Harry Potter. Look, is there a problem? Because I've got the floor saying. That was the only word for it, afterwards, and Harry used it for the rest of his life and never once found a better one. A single sustained note came up through the marble, through the soles of his trainers, into the bones of his ankles and his knees and his spine, and it was not a sound. Sound came in through the ears. This came in through the feet, and it kept coming, and it was hungry. The chandeliers rang, every one of them, 100 feet of crystal shivering at once, and the noise of the hall, the scratch of quills, the murmur of 100 customers, stopped like a throat cut. Mystery, Potter, the goblin said, and now he was standing on his stool. Step back from the counter. Harry tried. His feet wouldn't come off the floor. The second note came underneath the first, lower, and then a third under that, and it went on down past hearing into something his ribs registered as pressure. His scar had nothing to do with it. He'd have given anything later for it to have been his scar, because at least he knew that pain. He'd been living with that pain since he was 1 year old. This was new, and it started in his hands. His fingers curled. He watched them do it the way you watch a stranger's hands in a photograph, and every joint in them lit up white. Somebody screamed. Harry was fairly sure it wasn't him until he stopped and found out that it had been. He went down. Marble came up and hit his shoulder and his cheek, and he was aware of a woman shouting for a healer, and a goblin's voice cutting across her in gobbledygook. 3 sharp syllables repeated over and over like an alarm bell, and then the floor under his palms went hot. Not warm. Hot, like a hob left on, like a stone that had been sitting in the sun for a century, and beneath it, far, far beneath it, further down than the dragon, further down than the deepest vault, something enormous cracked. The chandelier over the west aisle came out of the ceiling and fell 40 feet and shattered into a wave of light across the marble. Somewhere behind him, the great bronze doors slammed shut on their own, and Gringotts Bank, which had been open every business day for 409 years, closed. Harry didn't see any of it. He was already gone. He dreamed. Except that dreaming was the wrong word, and he knew it even while it was happening. The way you sometimes know. He was standing in a room with no walls that he could see, and the floor of it was a shallow, round basin of black stone, perhaps 200 feet across, and the basin was full. Not with water, with light, but heavy light. Light that moved like mercury, silver, gold, and slow, sloshing gently against the rim as though something had recently jostled it. There were channels cut into the stone leading away from the basin in every direction. 50 of them. 60. And the light was running out along the channels and away into the dark, and had been running out along them for a very long time. The grooves were worn smooth. You didn't get grooves like that in a decade. There were figures standing in the basin. They stood ankle deep in the light with their backs to him, dozens of them, still as fence posts, and when he took a step forward, every one of them turned around at once. They had no faces, not blank, unfinished, like a coin worn down by 100,000 hands until you can only just tell there used to be a king on it. Ah, said one of them, and it wasn't a voice, it was a pressure behind his eyes. There you are. We wondered, who are you? Harry said, or tried to. Nobody, said another, and there was something dry in it, almost amused. That's rather the point, boy. That was the whole of the work. 300 years, said a third. 297, said the first. He's not going to care about the arithmetic, Corvinus. They were moving towards him. The light dragged around their legs, thick as syrup. You're robbed, the first one said, and it stopped in front of him. close enough that Harry could see the smooth suggestion of a mouth. We can smell it on you. Something was taken out of you before you could speak. Something is still being taken. Harry's hand went to his forehead without asking permission. So we're the same then, the figure said, and the cask is cracked, and the road is open, and we are so tired of the dark. I don't understand what you'll hold us, said another, and it sounded like grief. Like a mother's voice from a long way off. Just hold us, just until we can stand. And then they came at him all at once, all of them, and it wasn't an attack, it was worse. It was a homecoming, and Harry Potter opened his mouth to say no and found out that no was not a word that existed at the bottom of Gringots. The light came up his arms. He heard names as it went, not spoken, stamped, the way a hot iron stamps a barrel. Ashdown, Corvinus, Mortlake, Vasseur, Brackenridge, Wren, Dagworth Granger, and that one snag on something in him, that one he almost knew, Holloway, Sallow, Fenwick, on and on, faster and faster, until the names stopped being names and became a single roaring syllable, and the last one arrived like a hand closing over his Peveril. And under it, far down, cold and enormously old and not remotely friendly, something else turned over in its sleep and said, Slytherin. Harry screamed for the second time in his life without knowing he was doing it, and the basin went dark, and the light was all in him and none of it in the channels, and somewhere very far above him, 9 men in 9 different rooms in 3 different countries sat bolt upright at the same instant with their hearts going wrong in their chests. He woke up because someone was arguing about him in a language he didn't speak. Stone ceiling. Low. Lamps that burned with a flat green flame and made no smoke. He was lying on something that wasn't a bed so much as a slab with a blanket thrown over it, and the air tasted of iron filings and cold. 2 goblins stood at the foot of the slab. One was ancient, hunched, wearing a leather apron covered in small burns. The other was tall for a goblin, immaculate in charcoal gray, with a chain of office across his chest that had more keys on it than Harry had ever seen in one place. And I say again, the tall one was saying in perfectly clipped English, apparently for Harry's benefit, having clocked the moment his eyes opened, that the compact is very clear on the subject of unauthorized acquisitions, and if this boy has performed an unauthorized acquisition, then this boy owes us a bank. Where am I? Harry said. His voice came out like a shovel in gravel. 2 miles under Charing Cross Road, said the tall goblin. Level 9 of the Deep Vaults, in a chamber which has been sealed since the reign of William III. My name is Silverclaw. I am keeper of compacts, which means that when the law breaks, I am the one who has to explain it. You had been asleep for 3 days. Sit up. Harry sat up. His hands were in his lap and they were not his hands. He looked at them for a long moment with a strange, floating calm, because his brain had evidently decided that this was too much and had gone off to make a cup of tea. Every finger, every single finger, both hands, from the base knuckle to the first joint, stacked with rings. 4 on this finger, 5 on that one, 3, 6. Gold and iron and something white that wasn't silver, set with stones the size of peppercorns and stones the size of grapes, engraved filigreed, plain, one of them apparently made of polished bone. They fit like they'd been poured on. His fingers should not have been able to bend. His fingers bent fine. 50, said Silverclaw, watching him. We counted twice because the first count came out at 49 and Grimsmaw does not make mistakes, so we assumed 1 had been shy. Take them off. No. Take them off, Mr. Menger. Potter. Silverclaw's voice didn't rise. It just got very, very flat. Grimsmaw here has removed rings from the fingers of dead men, living men, and one man who was extremely put out about the process. 3 days ago, he attempted to remove the smallest of those rings with a lubricant, a cutting charm, and a chisel, in that order. The lubricant boiled. The charm went back up the wand and unmade it. The chisel is now a small pile of gray sand and Grimsmaw has no eyebrows. So, no. The old goblin said something short in gobbledygook. Harry didn't need the translation. He looked back at his hands. Under the green lamplight, the stones weren't reflecting anything. They were producing, very faintly, all 50 of them, like coals under ash. What are they? He said. Lordship rings, said Silverclaw. Signets. The physical seal of a magical house, one to a house, worn by the head of that house and by no other living soul. There are perhaps 90 in Britain. You are wearing 50. That's not possible. No, Silverclaw agreed. It is not. Would you like to see why it happened anyway? He turned and walked, and Harry, because the alternative was to sit on a slab under Charing Cross staring at his own fingers until he came apart, swung his legs down and followed. The corridor went down. It went down for a long time and it got warmer, and it stopped being cut stone and started being something that had been melted into shape a very long time ago, and then it opened out. Harry stopped in the doorway with his heart in his throat because he knew this room. He had stood in it 3 days ago with 50 faceless people. The basin was real. The black stone was real, 200 feet across, and the channels going out of it were real, worn smooth, running away into 50 separate tunnels. The only difference was the light. There wasn't any. It was bone dry and there was a crack across the floor of it wide enough to put your arm in. We call it the cradle, said Silverclaw. That's a translation. The word in gobbledygook is closer to the cask. It has sat beneath this bank since before this bank. We did not build it, and we do not own it, and we have never in 4 centuries been permitted to open the doors that lead off it." He pointed at the tunnels. 50 doors. 50 pipes. Something has been drinking out of this room for a very long time, Mr. Potter. And 3 days ago, at 11 minutes past 9 in the morning, it cracked, and every drop of what was in it went up through 900 feet of solid rock and got into a 15-year-old boy who was standing at teller station 4 asking for pocket money. "On 15 in a week," Harry said stupidly. "Congratulations." Harry walked out into the basin. His footsteps didn't echo right. The sound went into the stone and stopped. Like the room was still thirsty, he crouched at the edge of the crack. There were words carved on the inner rim, small and dense, and he couldn't read a single one of them. But his fingers hurt when he got close, all 50 rings pulling towards the stone like iron filings towards a magnet. And something in his chest said, "Mine, mine, mine. That's ours. That was taken." "They were people," he said. Silverclaw's head came around very slowly. "There were people standing in it," Harry said, "in the dream. 50 of them. They didn't have faces. They said they'd been robbed." He looked up. One of them said 300 years and another one corrected him. 297. The silence stretched out. "Grimsmaw," said Silverclaw in a voice like a knife going into a sheath. "Go and wake the directors." All of them, yes, including him. They put him in an office to wait, which was an insult dressed as hospitality, and Harry lasted about 4 minutes. He'd been trying to take the rings off again. Not with force, just turning them, working them, and they turned freely. They spun on his fingers like they were oiled. They simply would not come over the knuckle, and with every turn the pressure behind his eyes got worse. It felt like the moment before a sneeze, held for an hour. It felt like standing on a chair with your arms full. "Right," he said out loud, to nobody. "Fine." He'd only meant to let a bit of it out. Just enough to stop his hands shaking. There was a paperweight on the desk, a lump of polished hematite the size of a fist, and Harry put 2 fingers on it and thought up, and the paperweight went up, and the desk went up. And the floor of the office peeled itself off its joists like the lid coming off a tin, and the wall between the office and the great goblin audit hall next door, 12 feet of dressed granite that had stood since 1620, simply stopped being a wall and became 100 tons of gravel traveling at speed. The audit hall had 31 goblins in it, 400 years of ledgers, and a ceiling. It lost the ceiling first. Harry stood in the middle of it as the dust came down, in the sudden extraordinary quiet, with his arms out to either side and his hair full of powdered stone and a lightness in his chest like he'd just put down something he'd been carrying for 100 miles. Ledgers were still falling. One landed open at his feet. 31 goblins looked at him from under 31 desks. "Sorry," Harry said, and heard himself laugh, and got a grip on it before it ran away with him. I'm really, really sorry." Silverclaw came through what used to be the doorway, stepped over a fallen pillar without breaking stride, surveyed the wreckage of the audit hall of Gringots Bank, and said, "Well, at least now we know." 11,000 galleons, said Silverclaw. For a wall, a ceiling, the West Arcade, 206 ledgers requiring reinscription, and the eyebrows. He steepled his fingers. They were sitting in a different office now, a bigger one, with a window that looked out onto solid rock and had clearly been enchanted to do it out of sheer bloody-mindedness. "You'll find you can afford it. That's what I want to talk to you about." "I want to go home." "You have no home. You have 51. Silverclaw pulled a scroll towards him and let it fall open. It kept falling open. It went off the edge of the desk and rolled across the floor and hit the far wall and stopped, and it was written on both sides. "Since you were asleep, I have had 8 clerks working in shifts. This is what your hands are worth." "I don't want." "You are not being offered a choice, Mr. Potter. You are being briefed, and if you interrupt me again, I will let the directors do this instead, and they are less kind than I am." He didn't look up. 50 houses, every one of them declared extinct by the Ministry of Magic between the years 1698 and 1911. Every one of them held, at the time of extinction, at least one hereditary seat on the Wiesengemot, which is why the Wiesengemot has been quietly shrinking for 300 years and nobody has thought it strange. Every one of them left property in trust with his bank, because that is what dying houses do, and the property has been sitting here accruing interest since Queen Anne. Harry sat down. He hadn't intended to. 41 active alts, Silverclaw went on. 19 entailed estates in Britain, 4 in France, 1, God help us, in Prague, 2 seats on the board of the Daily Prophet, a 12th of Diagon Alley. A quarry in Wales that has been producing Wanwood-grade holly for 400 years, which means Ollivander has been paying rent to a dead man since 1922, and will be extremely interested to learn who's collecting now. He rolled the scroll back up. And 50 votes. 50. There are at present 111 active seats in the Wiesengemot. Your 50 do not count as active because their houses are legally extinct. Silverclaw showed his teeth. It was not a smile, but it was in the same family. Legally extinct, Mr. Potter, is a status. Statuses can be challenged, and a ring cannot be worn by a man whose house is dead, which means that as of 11 minutes past 9 on Tuesday morning, either those 50 houses are alive or magic itself is confused, and I have been a keeper of compacts for 200 years and I have never once seen magic get confused. Harry looked at his hands. 50. 50 families, 50 houses, 50 sets of doors and gardens and portraits. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about a boy who'd got a sock for Christmas, and something in his chest was making a noise like a kettle. Somebody killed them, he said. That, said Silverclaw, is a very large accusation. You got a room downstairs with 50 pipes coming out of it, and you're telling me 50 families died of natural causes over 300 years, and all of them just happened to be the ones with Weisengamot seats. Harry's voice was steady, which surprised him. You knew. You've known for years. We suspected. Silverclaw's yellow eyes didn't move. We are bankers, not avengers. Suspicion is not a billable service, and the cradle predates our lease on this ground, which means that under the Compact of 1612, it is not a goblin matter. And if you understood how much blood is in the phrase not a goblin matter, you would not be looking at me like that. So who is it? I don't know. Guess. I don't guess either. Silverclaw stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of him. Standing, he came up to Harry's chin. It didn't help at all. But I will tell you this for free, because you are about to be a great deal of trouble to a great many people, and I would rather the trouble were pointed usefully. Whoever drank out of that cask has been drinking for 3 centuries. That is not a man. That is an institution. Institutions do not accept losses. And they know your name, because for 3 days every wizard in Britain has been reading about the boy who lived collapsing in our lobby, and my hall was full of 100 customers when it happened. Great, said Harry. Now. Silverclaw returned to his chair and folded his hands. My price? Your what? You destroyed my audit hall, and you are about to require my institution to do a very great deal of work that our charter does not oblige us to do. You will want the extinction rulings challenged. You will want proof of the entailments. You will want, I imagine, someone to teach you how to hold 50 houses in your hands without knocking down another building. I can arrange all of it. Nobody else in Britain can arrange any of it. He let that sit. My price is the Wand Compact. Harry blinked. The what? Clause 4 of the Statute of Wand Restriction, 1631. No non-human may carry, own, or use a wand. Silverclaw said it without heat, which somehow made it much worse. My grandfather's grandfather signed that clause with a knife at his throat. 50 Wizengamot votes could repeal it in an afternoon. I am not asking you to promise me you will. You are 15 and your promises are worth precisely nothing this morning. I am asking you to promise me that when the day comes that you will put it to the floor. Win or lose, just put it to the floor. The office was very quiet. Harry thought about Dobby with a sock. He thought about Winky sobbing into her butterbeer. He thought about 100 goblins bent over ledgers under a ceiling that a 15-year-old had just taken off, and about the fact that not one of them had run. That's it, he said. That's your price? I thought you were going to ask for money. You have no money that isn't mine already, said Silverclaw. I hold your vaults. Harry laughed. A real one cracked in the middle. Then he put his hand out, and 50 rings caught the lamplight all at once, and Silverclaw looked at it for a long moment as though it were a document he was checking for forgeries. Put it to the floor, Harry said. I swear. The goblin took his hand. His grip was cool and dry and much too strong. Every ring on Harry's fingers went hot at the same instant. Silverclaw's eyes widened by about a millimeter, which on a goblin is roughly equivalent to falling off a chair. Ah, he said. It appears 50 houses agree with me. How gratifying. They took him up through the bank the back way, which was still an hour of stairs, and Harry spent most of it learning to walk while a marching band played in his chest. That was the closest he could get to it. Every step the rings pulled, a fraction ahead of him, a fraction to the left, like 50 people all trying to lead the same dance. When he stopped concentrating, door frames shrank away from his shoulders. A brass sconce turned to follow him past. Once, briefly, he was walking about an inch above the stairs and had to consciously come down, and Silverclaw, 3 steps ahead, said without turning around, Feet, Mr. Potter. How am I supposed to hide this? You aren't. I'm 15. For another week, yes, you've mentioned. Silverclaw stopped on the landing. Listen to me. There is a kind of wizard who thinks the way to survive a thing like this is to be small and quiet until it goes away. That wizard is always found in a ditch. Everything in your life from Tuesday morning onward will be decided by whether the people looking at you believe you know what you're doing. So do not skulk out of my bank. Walk out of it. The stairs came up into the back of the great hall through a door disguised as a pilaster, and Harry stepped out into the light and stopped dead. The chandelier was still down. They'd swept the glass into glittering drifts against the walls and roped the west aisle off with red cord, and the whole enormous space was empty. Not a customer, not a queue, just a long marble run of the teller's counter and about 40 goblins standing at their stations in absolute silence watching him come. He got about 15 feet. That's far enough. The voice came from the mezzanine. A man was standing at the balustrade above the doors, and he was so completely unremarkable that Harry's eye had skated straight over him twice. Middle-aged, brown robes, the boring kind, the kind a clerk from the Department of Transport wears. Thinning hair, a satchel over one shoulder. He could have stood in any queue in Britain and been forgotten by the person behind him. He had a wand out, and he was pointing it at Harry's chest, and his hand was not shaking at all. Mr. Rayna. Potter, the man said. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and then, depending, I'm going to kill you. I want you to know at the outset that I'd rather not. Every goblin in the hall dropped below their counter at once, in one motion, like a wave going down. How'd you get in here? Harry said. That's my question, not yours, and no. The man came a step along the balustrade. First, in the room under this building, did anything speak to you? Harry didn't answer. That's a yes. Second, did any of them say the name Peverell? 50 rings went cold. All at once, like 50 hands tightening. The man saw it in his face, and something in his shoulders went slack, not relief. Resignation, the look of a man who's found the leak and knows what it's going to cost to fix. That's a yes as well, he said. Damn. Third question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer, because this is the one that matters. Is Albus Dumbledore aware? Aware of what? Ah, said the man, he isn't. Good, that's something. And he killed Harry Potter, or he cast the spell that ought to have. Harry never learned the incantation. The man didn't say it aloud, just a flick of the wrist and a snap of the air like a wet towel. And something came off the end of that wand, the color of a bad bruise, and crossed 40 feet of Gringots' Great Hall in less time than it takes to blink. It hit about 8 inches from Harry's sternum and stopped. It hung there, spitting, straining forward like a dog on a lead, throwing purple light up the underside of Harry's chin. And Harry looked down at it with a detached sort of interest and thought, quite clearly, oh, you don't get to. He didn't raise his wand. His wand was in his back pocket and it stayed there. He raised his hand. 50 rings lit at once, not glowing, not glittering, but pouring. A hard white gold light that threw 50 separate shadows of him across the marble floor, and the spell hanging in front of his chest came apart the way frost comes off a window in the morning sun, and Harry closed his fist. The mezzanine balustrade, 4 tons of carved stone, folded inwards around the man in brown robes like a hand closing round a wasp. Marble shrieked. Stone dust blew out in a ring. The man got off one more spell as the world contracted on him, a lash of something green that Harry batted sideways without looking, and it went into a pillar and turned it black to a depth of 6 inches. Then it was quiet, and there was a shape in the middle of the crushed stone that was not a shape a person should be. Harry stood in the middle of the hall with his fist still closed, breathing hard, and the terrible thing, the thing he thought about at 4 in the morning for months afterwards, was that it hadn't been hard. It hadn't even been effortful. It had been like leaning on a door that was already open. He opened his hand. The light went out of the rings. Mr. Potter, said Silverclaw, from somewhere behind and to the left, in the tone of a man discussing weather, you have just committed murder in a bank. He shot first. He did, and 40 of my staff saw it, and Gringots is sovereign ground under the Compact of 1612, so the ministry may complain, but it may not investigate. Silverclaw was already walking towards the wreckage, gesturing to 2 goblins with a jerk of the chin. I mention it only because you are going to have to learn how it feels to have done that, and I would rather you started now, in front of witnesses who are on your payroll. On my... You own a 12th of Diagon Alley. Do try to keep up. They dug the man out. Harry made himself watch, which was a mistake, and then made himself keep watching, which was not. The satchel had survived, more or less, because it was charmed. Silverclaw slit the flap with a fingernail and tipped it out onto a teller's counter, and out came a wad of paper. Not a wad. A file, 200 pages of it, tied in a ribbon, and on the cover in small, clean copper plate. Subject 51. Potter. Harry James. B. 31 July 1, 1980. Harry's stomach dropped through the floor. He untied the ribbon with fingers that had stopped feeling like his, and turned the pages, and they went back and back and back. A sketch of a cot. A note about a house in Godric's Hollow, dated 3 weeks before his parents died. Fidelia supplied. Source not yet identified. Recommend patience. A page dated November 1981 in a different hand. Subject, survived. Cause unknown. Line of Peverell now sole surviving in this subject. Advise immediate call. And underneath, in a third hand, in red, denied. See Vane's memorandum of 14 Seft. Subject, maybe load-bearing. Page after page. His height at 7 years old. A description of Mrs. Figg's front room. A note from 1991. Subject entered Diagon Alley 31's VIE, accompanied by half-giant purchased wand Holly Phoenix and body. Holly from the Brackenridge Quarry. The stock recognizes him. Escalate. A drawing of the Hogwarts Express platform. Attendance at the Triwizard tasks all 3, with the crowd positions marked in ink and 1 figure circled every time. Somebody has been in the stands watching me since I was 1 year old, Harry thought, and it wasn't Voldemort. The last page was a list, 51 lines. 50 of them were names of families he'd never heard of. Ashdown, Corvinus, Mortlake, Vasseur, Brackenridge, Wren, Halloway, Sallow, Fenwick, and each one had a date beside it, and the dates went from 1698 to 1911, and the word beside each date was the same. Sexturid, line 51 said Potter/Peverell, and where the date should have been, there was a question mark. Harry set the page down very gently on the counter, because if he'd held it another second, he'd have burned it to ash and he wanted to keep it. Silverclaw. What's sequestered mean? In law. The goblin's voice had gone quiet. It means property seized and held by a third party during a dispute. It is a temporary measure. It is what you do to a thing when you do not wish to be seen to own it. They didn't kill them. No. Killing a house ends it. Killing a house ends the magic. Silverclaw pulled the list towards him with one finger, and for the first time since Harry had met him, the goblin looked old. They kept them. Somewhere. For 300 years. And they drank. He fire-called Sirius from a private room because Silverclaw pointed out with brutal accuracy that if Harry walked out of the bank and apparated to Grimmauld Place, he would probably arrive as a fine mist, and because Harry had realized, somewhere around page 90 of the file, that he was going to start shaking soon and he wanted to be somewhere with a door when he did. Sirius's head appeared in the flames, looking like it hadn't slept, which it hadn't. Harrod? I'm okay. You are not okay. You've been missing 3 days. There are goblins refusing to answer owls. Dumbledore's got half the order sitting in Diagon Alley pretending to buy cauldrons. Molly's had to be sedated. He stopped. His eyes had found Harry's hands. What is that? Sirius, what is on your hands? Harry held them up. For 9 long seconds, his godfather said absolutely nothing at all. And then Sirius Black, who had laughed his way out of Azkaban, made a small broken sound in the back of his throat. Oh no, he said. Oh Harry, no. You know what they are. I know what one of them is. I've got one. Sirius's voice had gone somewhere Harry had never heard it go. It's in a box in the drawing room, and I haven't put it on since I was 16, because the moment I do, I'm Lord Black, and every filthy thing this family ever did is legally mine. He leaned forward until the flames washed white over his face. Harry, listen to me. How many is that? 50. 50 houses, all of them dead, all of them killed or not killed, kept Sirius. There's a room under the bank with pipes coming out of it, and a bloke just tried to murder me in the lobby, and he had a file on me going back to before Mum and Dad died, and it says somebody decided not to kill me because I might be load-bearing slow down. And the note signed Vane, and I don't know who Vane is, and there's a list of 50 families, and one of them is Dagworth Granger. Sirius. That's Hermione did a whole thing about Dagworth Granger in second year. He founded the Potioneers Guild, and they're extinct. They're extinct. They're extinct. They're extinct. Extinct. They're extinct. Except Hermione Granger's parents are dentists in Hampstead, and nobody in her family has ever done magic before her, and I am going to be sick. Harry, I'm gonna be sick, Sirius. Harrod. He stopped. He was gripping the edge of the hearth. There were finger marks in the stone. Sirius's face in the flames was very still. Right, he said. Right, he said. Here's what we're doing. You're going to stay exactly where you are, because Gringots is the only building in Britain the Ministry can't kick a door in. I'm going to get Remus, and I'm going to not get Dumbledore, because if that file says what you think it says, then I want to look at Albus's face when he hears the word Vane, and I want to be in the room when I do it. A breath. And Harry, the rings. Are they hurting you? Harry looked down at them. 50 faces with no faces. 50 voices saying, just hold us, just until we can stand. No, we said, honestly. And that was the frightening part. They feel like they've come home. Sirius closed his eyes for a second. 12 hours, he said. Don't leave the bank. Don't sign anything. And Harry, for the love of God, don't sneeze. He left the bank 6 hours later because Silverclaw came in with an owl. Not a bank owl, a Ministry 1, barn white official with a wax seal Harry had seen exactly once before, when he was 12 and had just been blamed for a hovering pudding. Dear Mr. Potter, we have received intelligence that at 9:11 a.m. on Tuesday, 27th June, you performed magic in the presence of 106 witnesses in a Muggle-adjacent commercial premises, and that at 11:40 a.m. on Friday, 30th June, you employed lethal force against a Ministry-registered wizard on the same premises. You are hereby summoned to a disciplinary hearing before the full Wiesengemot on Thursday, 6th July at 9 a.m. Courtroom 10, Level 9, Ministry of Magic, on charges of underage sorcery, breach of the Statute of Secrecy, and murder. Your wand is required to be surrendered at the atrium desk upon arrival. Yours sincerely, Mafalda Hopkirk, Improper Use of Magic Office. Harry read it twice. Then he laughed, and it came out of him hard and hot and not entirely sane. Full Wiesengemot, said Silverclaw, reading over his elbow with no apology whatsoever. For underage magic. Do you know how many times in the last 2 centuries the full Wiesengemot has been convened for a schoolboy's misuse of a wand? None. They are not trying you. They are counting you. Someone up there has done the arithmetic on your fingers and wants to see whether you know what you're holding before you find out you can use it. He plucked the letter from Harry's hand and looked at it critically. Also, they've addressed it to Mr. Potter. That's my name. It's a name. Silverclaw handed it back. You have 51. 6 days, Mr. Potter. Learn to walk. Harry went out through the bronze doors at 6:30 in the evening with a satchel over his shoulder containing 200 pages of somebody else's copperplate handwriting in Diagon Alley stopped. It just stopped. A woman with a bag of flourish and blots halted mid-stride. 2 boys outside Quality Quidditch turned round. The sound of the street dropped by half and then by half again, and it rolled outwards from the steps of Gringots as people saw him and then saw his hands. Because Harry hadn't put them in his pockets. He'd thought about it on the stairs the whole way up. And then he thought about a man on a mezzanine saying, "I'd rather not," and he let them hang at his sides where everyone could see. He got as far as the second step. Potter. She was leaning against the railing at the bottom, out of the way of the gawpers in dark green summer robes, with a book under one arm and the expression of someone who had been standing there for a considerable time and had budgeted for it. Blonde, blue eyes like a cold morning. He knew the face from Slytherin's end of the Great Hall, and had never in 4 years heard her voice. "Green grass," he said, dredging it up. "Daphne." She glanced at his hands, and unlike everyone else on that street, she didn't gape. She counted. He watched her eyes tick along his knuckles, and then she nodded once as if a bet had gone her way. 50. There were 3 numbers going round. I had money on 50. "Sorry, do you want something?" "Yes." She pushed off the railing. "In 6 days, you're going to walk into courtroom 10, and Cornelius Fudge is going to try you for murder in front of 111 people, and about 90 of them are going to vote whichever way the room is leaning, because that is how the Wizengamot has worked since 1707. You don't know any of their names. You don't know which of them owe money to which of the others, or who's got a daughter marrying whose son, or which 4 of them will vote against Fudge on absolutely anything because of a boundary dispute in 1953. She held up the book. It was thick, dog-eared, and titled Rolls of the Wizengamot, a Register. "I do. I've read it 11 times. My father says it's a waste of a good mind, and my mother says nobody will marry me." Harry stared at her. "Why?" he said. "Because we're one bad harvest from losing our seat, and a girl with no seat and no money has exactly one thing to sell. And I'd rather it was this." She said it flatly, without a flicker, the way you'd read out a shopping list, and Harry felt something in his chest go very quiet. "So, you need someone who knows the room. I need someone who can hold a room. I'm not asking you to like me, Potter. I'm asking you to be at the Leaky at 9 tomorrow with a strong pot of tea." Behind him, up on the steps, the great bronze doors of Gringots were swinging shut for the night, and the last of the light was going amber down the length of Diagon Alley, and somewhere under 2 miles of London rock there was a dry stone basin with a crack across it and 50 empty pipes. Harry Potter looked at his hands. "Just hold us," they'd said. "Just until we can stand." "8:30, he said. "And I'm buying." Chapter 2. The Counting of Seats. The leaky cauldron at 8:30 in the morning smelled like bacon and last night's beer, and Daphne Greengrass had taken the corner table under the window with her back to the wall and 3 books already open. Harry put the teapot down between them. Every head in the pub had turned when he came through the door from the alley side, and about half of them hadn't turned back. "You're 8 minutes late," Daphne said, not looking up. "There was a photographer at the ice cream place." "Was there?" She turned a page. "Did he get your hands?" "I put them in my pockets." Now she looked up. "Don't do that. You lot want it both ways." "There is no both ways. There's one way." She pushed a book across the table at him, spun it round with 2 fingers so it faced him properly, and tapped a page. "Read the 3rd paragraph." It was dense, and the print was small, and Harry got about 4 lines in before the words started sliding. "And it is further held that a lordship signet, being a construct of blood magic and not of ministry law, cannot be worn by any but the head of an unextinguished house. The presence of the ring being therefore, in law, prima facie evidence that the house survives, notwithstanding any prior finding of the Wizengamot to the contrary." He read it 3 times. Then he read it a 4th, and by then his tea had gone cold and Daphne was watching him with her chin on her hand. "They can't call them extinct," he said. "They've been calling them extinct for 300 years. But they can't. It's on my hand. It's literally on my hand." "Yes." She sat back. "That's the whole case, Potter. Everything else is theater. That paragraph is from Twycross v. The Crown, 1704. It's never been overturned, and the reason nobody's ever used it is that nobody's ever turned up wearing a dead house's ring because the houses were all extremely dead." A small pause. "Until Tuesday." The bacon smell had thickened. Tom was doing something aggressive with a frying pan. "How do you know all this?" Daphne poured her own tea because he'd forgotten to, and did it with the unhurried precision of somebody who had decided that being flustered was for other people. "My great-grandfather bought our seed," she said. 1908. He was in glass bottles mostly, potion trade. The receipts going cheap because the old mines kept dying out, and if you had 4,000 galleons and a name that sounded old enough, you could pick one up. Everybody knows. Nobody says." She stirred. "So I grew up in a house where the Wizengamot roll was the family Bible, because our name is on it and it shouldn't be, and if we ever miss a session or default on a levy, it goes back in the pot and we're nobody. My sister learned the harp. I learned the roll. And now the old lines aren't dying out. No." Her mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "Now a 15-year-old is wearing 50 of them, and the entire arithmetic of British magical politics has come apart in 6 days, and every man on that bench who bought his way in is currently lying awake at 4 in the morning." She drank her tea. "And including my father. He's not sleeping. He hasn't come out of the study since Tuesday. Is he scared of me? He's scared of you being real. She set the cup down. If those 50 houses are alive, then somebody killed them. And if somebody killed them, then a lot of very comfortable men have been sitting in chairs that belong to murdered people. Nobody in that room wants that to be true, Potter. Not the good ones either. It's too big to be true and still have breakfast. Harry turned his teacup around on the saucer. 50 rings clicked softly against the china. You said your birthday's the 31st, Daphne said abruptly. What? The Prophet ran a thing yesterday about you turning 15 this week. Some rot from an unnamed source. You told someone you were 15 in a week. I told a goblin, Harry said. 3 days underground, no sleep, 50 rings welded on my fingers, Blow asked me how I was, and I said something stupid about my birthday. It's the 31st. Good. She wrote something in the margin of the smallest book. Because if you'd been 3 weeks older, the underage charge would have collapsed on its own, and Fudge would have had to actually be clever, and I'd rather Fudge stayed stupid. They worked for 4 hours that first day, and 5 the next, and on the 3rd day she made him do it standing up. Again. Green grass. Again. And this time don't shift your weight. You do it every time you say a name you're not sure of. You rock. It's like watching a bad liar at a wedding. She was sitting on the edge of the long table in the private room over the bar with her ankles crossed, flipping cards. Who's this? Griselda Marchbanks, governor of the Examinations Authority. Votes with Dumbledore about half the time and against Fudge nearly always because she thinks he's a shopkeeper. Good. This one. Tiberius Ogden, Wizengamot Elder, resigned from something in protest last month. He resigned from the Hogwarts board in protest over the Umbridge appointment, which means he'll want to be seen being brave, which means you can have him if you look him in the eye once. This one. No idea. Elphinstone Bulstrode, second cousin to the girl in your year, votes exactly the way Malfoy tells him because Malfoy holds a note on his house in Kent. Next. By the end of the 3rd day, Harry could name 60 of them cold. By the end of the 4th, he could name 90 and could say for each one who they hated. And it turned out that in the Wizengamot who you hated was worth about 4 times what you believed. You're not bad at this, Daphne said, gathering cards. You sound annoyed. I am, a bit. I've spent 9 years on it and you've caught up in 4 days. She squared the deck against the table with 2 sharp raps. Also, you cheat. You've stopped saying the names out loud. Harry blinked. What? Twice this afternoon I asked you a name and you got the answer right and your mouth never moved. She looked at him levelly. Something's happening in there, Potter. When you go quiet, the lamps in this room get brighter. I've been marking it 6 times in 2 hours. He glanced up. The lamps looked normal. They were, in fact, a little brighter than they had been at breakfast. They talk, he said after a moment. Not words. It's like when you walk into a room and everyone's just stopped talking about you and you can feel the shape of what they were saying. He rubbed his thumb over the bone-white ring on his left forefinger. When you said Marchbanks, one of them went warm. I don't know which one. I think one of them knew her grandmother. Daphne was quiet for a second. That's 50 dead families sitting in your hands giving you political advice, she said. You know that's mad. Yeah. Are you frightened of it? No, said Harry, and meant it, and watched her file that away somewhere behind her eyes. Grimmauld Place smelled of dust and old cooking, and Sirius met him at the door and hugged him hard enough to bruise ribs, and then held him at arm's length and looked at his hands and said, right, in a voice that had rust on it. You've got a plan, Harry said. I've got several, most of them are bad. Sirius pulled him inside and slammed the door on the summer. Come and see the sitting room. I've had to move the sofa because Remus has been sleeping on it and he sheds. That's a filthy thing to say. Remus called from the kitchen, and also true. The file was already spread over the kitchen table, 200 pages, weighted at the corners with a milk jug, an ashtray, and 2 of Creature's less murderous ornaments, and Remus Lupin was standing over it in a cardigan with 3 days of stubble and the expression of a man reading his own death certificate. Harry. He looked up. Page 141. Harry found it. It was a duty log, dates in one column, initials in another, and the line for observations. 16 years of it, 4 to a page. Subject at play, rear garden, unsupervised 40 mins. Subject punished, cupboard, 2 days. Subject accelerated up school wall, no wand. Investigating, recommend no action, accidental. Subject took Hogwarts Express 1x Mayence 91. They watched me get locked in a cupboard, Harry said, and wrote it down. They watched everything. Remus's voice was flat in a way Harry had heard maybe twice. Harry, page 152. He turns to it. Field note 24/93. Subject's guardian at large. Black, S. House Black, signet unclaimed. Holder incarcerated 12 euros. House dormant, not extinct. Query. Viability of sequestration on Black should current holder be neutralized. Ref. Vain standing preference for lines with prophetic entanglement. Answer. 26x/93. Shortlisted. Not now. The Dementors will likely resolve it for us. Sirius had gone to stand by the window with his back to them. Sirius, it's fine. It's not. No, it's genuinely fine. I'm not upset, I'm furious, which I'm much better at. He turned round. His face was doing something complicated. 12 years. 12 years I sat in that cell and I thought, You know what got me through? I thought, at least it's not personal. At least it was just Peter, just one rat in a bad afternoon. And now some clerk in Whitehall has written the Dementors will likely resolve it for us, in a nice hand, and filed it, and I'm on a short list. He laughed ugly. I'm on a short list, Mooney. Remus said nothing and put a hand on his shoulder and left it there. Right, said Sirius, after a moment. He wiped his face with the heel of his hand. Creature, get the black box out of the drawing room cabinet. The one with the, yes, that one, and don't drop it, and don't put your face in it either. What box? Said Harry. Sirius didn't answer. He went and stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms folded until the elf came shuffling back with a flat lacquered case, and then he took it and set it on the table on top of 200 pages of surveillance and opened it. The ring inside was black gold, heavy and ugly. The stone was jet, carved with a coat of arms Harry had seen 100 times on the tapestry upstairs, and under it the words toujours per, and the whole thing sat in its little velvet groove, radiating the specific hostility of an object that has been hated by everyone who ever owned it. I told you I hadn't put it on since I was 16, Sirius said. That's a lie. I never put it on at all. Mother put it in my hand on my 16th birthday and I dropped it on the floor and walked out of the house, and that was the last civil conversation we had. He looked at it. Thursday morning when they open that courtroom, you're going to be standing in the well of it on your own, and every one of those bastards is going to be looking down at a boy with no family and no name. Sirius, no. So you'll have one. He picked the ring up. House Black. 5th oldest seat in the chamber. Hasn't been filled since 1979, and half that room is related to me and all of that room is scared of me. And I'm a wanted man, so I can't sit in it, which is a shame because I'd have loved to see Lucius Malfoy's face. He held it out flat on his palm. But a lord can grant proxy. On the day, in writing, sealed. Which means my vote goes in your pocket, and more importantly, so does my name. And the second Amelia Bones reads out proxy for the House of Black, the entire room stops looking at an orphan. They'll come for you, said Remus quietly. The moment you seal that, the ministry knows Sirius Black is alive and in the country and lucid enough to execute a legal instrument. They already know I'm alive, Mooney. They've got posters. Sirius was still holding out his hand. Harry looked at the ring. 50 voices in his fingers looked at it too. He felt them do it. A slow collective turning of attention, like a crowd in a station watching a train come in. You said every filthy thing this family did would be legally yours, he said. Yeah. Sirius pushed it onto his own finger and his mouth went tight for a second as it seated. Turns out that's a thing you can survive. He flexed the hand, looked at it with something between hatred and grief, and then grinned, and it was almost the old grin. God, it's heavy. How do you walk about with 50? Badly, said Harry. I keep floating. Course you do. Dumbledore came on the Tuesday 2 days before the hearing, and he came alone and he knocked instead of walking straight in, which Harry noticed. They had it out in the drawing room, with the door shut and Sirius standing against it like a bailiff. For the first 4 minutes, Dumbledore said all the reasonable things. That he had been searching for Harry since Tuesday, that the goblins had refused every approach and had been within their rights to do so. That he understood, better than Harry might think, what it was to have power arrive before one has asked for it. Harry let him finish. Then he put the last page of the file on the table, the list. 51 lines and a question mark, and turned it round. Do you know the name Vane? The room got very quiet. Harry had been braced for a lot of things. Confusion. A gentle deflection. What he got was Albus Dumbledore going. Still. Completely still, the way an old man goes still when he stands up too fast, and looking at that page for a long, long moment, and then taking off his spectacles and folding them, which Harry had never seen him do. Yes, said Dumbledore. Sirius made a sound like a kettle. Sit down, Sirius, Dumbledore said without turning round. Please, this will be worse if we shout. You knew! I have known since 1946. He set the spectacles on the table beside the list. I have known since a very old man came to my rooms at Hogwarts 3 months after I killed Gellert Grindelwald's war and offered me his congratulations and told me that he had been going to solve the problem himself and was pleased not to have had to. He was polite. He drank 2 cups of tea. He explained to me with figures that the wizarding world produces a would-be conqueror on average once every 81 years, that the mechanism is hereditary power concentrated in ancient houses with nothing left to want, and that he and his colleagues had, since 1698, been quietly removing such houses before they could ripen. A pause. He named 6. He had stopped. 2 of the names I recognized. One of them I'd personally been afraid of as a boy. Removing, said Harry. His word was sequestering. Dumbledore's hands were folded on the table, and they were not entirely steady. I did not know then what was done with what they took. I know now what you found under the bank, because you have just told me, and I would give a great deal to have died before hearing it. You let them. Yes. Harry had had an entire speech ready. He'd built it over 6 days. It all fell out of his head at once because you cannot argue with a man who says yes. Why? Because I was 39 years too late to save the first 15 houses, because I had just buried a great many people, and because Cassius Vane sat in my study and told me accurately that if I moved against him, he would have to move against me, and that the war I had just ended would begin again inside a decade with better wizards on both sides. Dumbledore's voice didn't rise, but something behind it did. I made a judgment. I judged that one theft, however monstrous, cost fewer lives than one more war. I have re-examined that judgment perhaps 100 times. It has never once come out cleanly, and I have never once been brave enough to overturn it, and I have sat in the Wiesengemot for 40 years within 20 feet of at least 2 of them, and said nothing. 2 of them are in the room? Yes. You know which ones. I know 2. There are 9. Dumbledore looked up, and Harry was startled to find he'd been wrong about the stillness. The old man's eyes were wet. Harry! You are going to walk into that chamber on Thursday, and you are going to break 300 years of arithmetic across your knee, and I'm going to sit in my seat and watch you do it, and I want you to understand that I will not be helping you. Not because I disapprove. Because the moment I am seen to be behind you, everything you do becomes my coup, and Cornelius will have the excuse he has been praying for since October. He stood slowly. You have to be your own or it won't hold. That's convenient. It is true, said Dumbledore, and it is also convenient, and you are quite right to hate that. At the door he stopped. The girl, he said, Miss Greengrass. Harry's jaw set. What about her? Nothing at all, said Dumbledore mildly. Only that in 40 years I have never seen anyone under 50 read the rolls voluntarily, and it is a considerable relief to me that she found you before somebody worse did. Do listen to her. A very small pause. And Harry, when you go into that room, do not look for Vane. He will find that amusing, and I would rather he were not amused. The night before, Hermione came. She arrived by flu at 9 o'clock with her hair enormous from the powder, and a look on her face that Harry recognized from second year, from the library, from every time she'd found a thread and pulled it. Ron's coming down tomorrow with the twins, she said, dropping onto the kitchen bench. Mrs. Weasley's furious, everyone's furious. Ron's written you 4 letters and burnt 3 of them because he says they sounded stupid. Harry, are those rings? They said 50 and I assumed the prophet was. She caught his hands and turned them over like she was marking an essay, and her voice went small. Oh, yeah. Do they hurt? Everyone asks that. He shook his head. No. Right. She let go and squared her shoulders, and Harry braced. Then can I ask something horrible? Because I've been sitting on it for 2 days and it's making me ill. Go on. Dagworth Granger. She said it fast, like ripping a plaster. Hector Dagworth Granger, founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers. It's in the file, isn't it? Sirius's letter said 50 names, and I asked him and he wouldn't answer me, which means yes. She was very pale under the kitchen lamp. I asked Professor Slughorn's old society about the name in second year. They wrote back saying the line ended in 1836. No issue, no cadet branches. No issue, Harry. That's the phrase they used. Hermione, my granddad was from Bristol. Nobody in my family's ever done anything. Not once, not a hint. And I'm mime. I'm me. I'm the top of every class, and every single teacher who's ever met me has said the same thing in the same slightly puzzled voice. Remarkable for a Muggleborn, like it's a compliment. Her breath hitched and she got hold of it, and Harry had never admired her more. Is my family a crime scene? The kitchen was silent except for the clock. I don't know, Harry said. That's the honest answer. There's 50 names and yours is one of them, and I don't know what the connection is, and the man who could have told me is dead in a bank. He turned his left hand over. But, Hermione, when they came at me in the dream, they said names. 50 of them, all at once, and I only caught a few, and yours was one of the ones that stuck. That is an evidence. No, it isn't evidence, Harry. It's a dream. And I refuse to build anything on. She stopped, wiped her face with the back of her wrist angrily, like the tears were a spelling mistake. Where would the evidence be? Silverclaw thinks there's a ledger. You can't sequester 50 houses over 300 years without keeping accounts, and they kept accounts on me going back to before I was born, so they keep accounts on everything. He watched her sit up straighter as her brain took hold of it, the way it always did, the way you could practically hear. He says it won't be at the bank. Gringots would have found it. Then it's at the ministry, said Hermione. Probably. Right. She pulled a napkin towards her and started writing on it, and her hand was shaking and her writing was perfectly neat. Right. Then win tomorrow because you can't search the ministry from a cell in Azkaban. He didn't sleep much. At about 4, he gave up and sat on the stairs in the dark, and Sirius found him there at 6 with 2 cups of tea, and sat down beside him without saying anything for a while. Nervous? No, said Harry, and it was true, and that was the thing that had kept him awake. That's the problem. I keep waiting for it and it's not coming. Sirius blew on his tea. When I was 19, he said, we went into a house in Bristol after 4 Death Eaters, and I remember standing in the garden thinking I ought to be terrified, and I wasn't. I was delighted, and I've spent a lot of years since then wondering whether that made me a good Auror or a bad person. He nudged Harry's shoulder with his own. Verdict's still out, but I'll tell you the useful part. It's not the not being scared that gets people killed. It's the bit where you start enjoying it and forget to check the corners. Check the corners. Check the corners. Sirius agreed. There's going to be a man in that room today who's been checking corners since Queen Anne. The ministry atrium at 8:30 in the morning was a river of people, and it stopped flowing the moment he stepped out of the grate. Harry had known it would. He braced for it. What he hadn't braced for was Daphne Greengrass, in gray, waiting by the fountain with her hair up and her chin at an angle, taking one look at him and saying, "You've done your collar up wrong," and fixing it in front of 200 people, which, he understood, about 4 seconds later, was the single most effective piece of political theater performed in that building all year. Was that necessary? Extremely, she murmured. Now they've all seen someone touch you casually. It cost them something. Walk on my left. Why? Because your left hand's got Mortlake and Ashdown on it. They're the two everyone will recognize from the old coinage. And I want them photographed. Sirius came through the grate behind them in a hooded traveling cloak with Remus at his elbow and did not lower the hood. And by the time they reached the security desk, there was a sound going through the atrium like wind through wheat. The witch at the desk asked for his wand. "No," said Harry pleasantly. "Sir, it's required. All wands are registered. It says in the summons that my wand is required to be surrendered at the atrium desk," Harry said. "And it also says I'm to be tried for using magic without one, so I think we can agree the summons hasn't thought this through." He put both hands flat on the counter. 50 rings clicked down on the wood at once, and the desk lamp flared and blew its shade off. The witch looked at his hands and then at his face and wrote "declined" in her ledger in very small letters. "Level 9, she said faintly. "Lifts are on your—" "I know where it is," said Harry. "I've been tried here before." Courtroom 10 had not changed. Same dungeon walls, same torches, same chill that got into the back of your neck. Same single chair in the middle of the floor with chains lying slack on its arms like something asleep. What had changed was how full it was. Last time there'd been 50. Today the benches went up in tiers into the dark and every one of them was occupied. Plum robes, silver W's, 111 pale ovals looking down. The public gallery at the back was jammed. There were 3 photographers penned behind a rope and one of them was already taking pictures of the empty chair. Harry walked in and did not sit down. Mr. Potter. Cornelius Fudge, front and center, in his lime green bowler hat with his hands folded on the bench. He looked tired and pouchy and completely determined. "You will take the seat. I'd rather stand." The accused sits. "Then charge me with standing." A ripple went through the gallery. Somewhere to his left, a woman with a monocle, Amelia Bones, head of magical law enforcement. Daphne's cards had said straight as a plumb line. "Hates being lied to more than she hates you," was watching him with sharp interest and a very slight tilt of the head. At Fudge's right elbow, a squat woman in pink cardigan and plum robes made a small noise like a kitten sneezing. Dolores Umbridge. Harry hadn't met her before, but the card had said believes what she does is kindness, and looking at her he thought Daphne had understole it, because the woman was smiling at him with what looked like genuine warmth and it was the most frightening thing in the room. "Very well," said Fudge, going red. "Stand. Disciplinary hearing of the 6th of July into offenses committed under the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery and the International Statute of Secrecy by Harry James Potter, resident." He checked. "Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Interrogators: Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Minister for Magic. Amelia Susan Bones, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Court Scribe, Percy Ignatius Weasley." Percy did not look up. "Witnesses for the defense?" "2, said Harry. Fudge blinked. "I beg your—" Sirius pushed his hood back. The scream from the gallery was one voice, and then it was 30, and then half the Wisengamot was on its feet, and 2 oars on the door had their wands up and were being roared at by 3 separate people at once, and Amelia Bones was standing with her hand raised and shouting for order in a voice that had done 20 years of parade grounds. "Sit down," she bellowed. "All of you, Dawlish, hold your position. Nobody has cast anything. Sit down." The noise came down to a boil. "Sirius Black," said Amelia Bones. "Into a silence you could have stood a spoon in. Morning, Amelia." Sirius smiled at her. "You're grayer. You're thinner." Her jaw worked. "You're a convicted." "Never convicted. Never tried either, which is the bit I keep going on about." He said it lightly and it landed like a slab. "I'm not here for me. I'm here to execute an instrument and then, honestly, to leave. Because I don't like this room and it doesn't like me." He drew a scroll from inside his cloak and held it up, and the black seal on it was the size of a fist. "Lord Sirius Orion Black, holder of the 5th seat, in person, in this chamber, granting full proxy of the House of Black to Harry James Potter for the duration of this session and until revoked. Sealed with a signet. It's valid, somebody check it." "You cannot possibly." Fudge had gone the color of his hat. "Minister," said Amelia Bones, not taking her eyes off Sirius, "the seal is either valid or it isn't. Weasley, check it." Percy came down from the scribe's desk, took the scroll, ran his wand over the wax, and went white. "It's valid," he said. "He's an escaped." "It's valid, Minister." Percy's ears were scarlet, but his voice was steady, and Harry felt something in his chest shift very slightly. "House Black's dormancy is administrative, not legal. There's no attainder on the file. I checked last week." "You checked last week?" "I check everything," said Percy, and went back to his desk. Lucius Malfoy, 3 rows up on the left in pale gray, had not made a sound. Harry glanced up at him and found the man's eyes already there. Cool and pale and doing sums. So noted, said Amelia Bones grimly. Black, you will remain in this chamber under oral observation until this session ends, and then you and I are going to have an extremely long conversation. Wouldn't miss it. Sit down, Minister. The charges. Fudge got himself back together with an effort that was audible. The charges, he said, are as follows. That on the 27th of June, the accused performed magic in a public place before more than 100 witnesses. That on the 30th of June, he employed lethal force. And that in both instances, he was underage, unsupervised, and in flagrant breach. Where? Said Harry. I beg your pardon? Where did I do it? Fudge's mouth opened and shut. Umbridge leaned in and murmured something. Gringots Wizarding Bank, said Fudge. Right, said Harry. So Harry, showing you in question because I've only been in this world 4 years and I keep learning things. He looked up at the benches, at all 111 of them. Whose law runs inside Gringots? Nobody answered. Anyone? It's the Compact of 1612, said a dry voice from high on the right, an ancient witch, Marchbanks, sounding entertained. The bank floor is sovereign goblin ground, Minister, as you very well know, and the improper use of magic office has no jurisdiction over so much as a spill inkwell inside those doors. I sat on the review in 1971. There is a dead man? There is a dead man on goblin ground, said Harry. Killed on goblin ground in front of 40 goblin witnesses, and the goblins have ruled it self-defense and closed the matter, and if you want to argue with them about it, there's a queue. He let that sit for exactly as long as Daphne had drilled him. But I don't actually want to win on a technicality, Minister. So let's do the other one. Let's do underage sorcery. Fudge's chin came up. You admit. I want to ask about my name. The change of gear did what it was meant to do. Fudge sat there with his mouth half open on a sentence that had gone somewhere else. You've called me Mr. Potter 11 times this morning, Harry said. It's on the summons. Mr. Potter, number 4 Privet Drive. He pulled off his glasses, cleaned them on his sleeve, put them back on, Daphne's idea, give them 3 seconds to look at your hands, and said, Amelia Bones, you're head of law enforcement. If I'm wearing a lordship signet, am I a minor? Under the decree, Umbridge began, in a voice like sugar syrup. I asked her. Umbridge's smile did not move a millimeter, and something behind it went out like a light. Amelia Bones took her time. She looked at his hands, and Harry watched a woman who had presumably been briefed on this in every detail actually look at it for the first time. No, she said. A lord of a house is of age in the eyes of magical law from the moment the signet seats, irrespective of years. It's why Barnabas Cuff's grandfather sat at 14. A pause. It has been considered a dead letter since the last minor inheritance in 1904. Right. Harry raised his left hand and turned it slowly and let the torchlight run along 5 fingers of stacked gold. Then I'd like the court to enter into the record that Harry James Potter is head of the House of Potter and holder of the Pervel signet, and that as of 9/11 on Tuesday, the 27th of June, he is also head of the houses of Ashdown, Corvinus, Mortlake, Vassar, Brackenridge, Wren, Halloway, Salloway, Fenwick, Dagworth Granger. The Gallery Islao, Fenwick, Dagworth Granger. The Gallery Islao, Fenwick, Dagworth Granger. He'd learned them the way he'd learned Quidditch plays, over 6 nights with Daphne rapping the table when he got the order wrong, and he stood in the middle of courtroom 10 and said 50 names into an uproar, and by the 20th, the uproar had begun to die because people wanted to hear the rest. By the 40th, the chamber was silent. By the 50th, Cornelius Fudge had stopped being a man on a bench and had become a man in a chair. And Peveril, Harry finished. 51 houses, every one of them declared extinct by this body between 1698 and 1911. Every one of them still, apparently, alive enough to put a ring on me. He turned his hand over. So before we do the underage thing, Minister, I think somebody should probably explain how 50 extinct families manage that. This is lunacy. Twycross v. the Crown, said a clear voice from the gallery. Every head turned. Daphne Greengrass was standing at the rail with her book open, and she was perfectly composed, and about 6 inches of her hair had come out of its pin. 1704, she said. The presence of the ring being therefore, in law, prima facie evidence that the house survives notwithstanding any prior finding of the Wiesengemot to the contrary, never overturned. Cited approvingly in 1811, 1867, and 1922. It's in the rolls, page 3009, and every person on that bench has a copy under their seat. Young lady, you have no standing. She's got mine, said a man 3 rows behind her, standing up, and Harry knew the face from a card, Greengrass, Cyrus. 1 seat from ruin. Won't move first. He looked like he hadn't slept in a fortnight and like he'd decided something on the stairs. She's my daughter. Her voice is my voice. Sit down, Cornelius. The girl's right, and you know it. And then it happened. And it happened the way avalanches do. Not all at once, but with one stone. An old man on the far left stood up and said, Read the paragraph. Then Tiberius Ogden stood and said it louder. Then Griselda Marchbanks banged her stick twice on the bench and demanded the rolls be brought, and there was a shout from the back of let the boy finish, and somewhere in the middle of it Lucius Malfoy rose smoothly to his feet and said, in a voice pitched to carry over everything, Minister, If I may, the room quieted for him. Harry noted that. It was worth noting. Whatever the boy is, Malfoy said, he is plainly not a schoolboy who has hexed his cousin. This chamber convened to consider a matter of underage sorcery, and appears instead to be considering the resurrection of 50 houses, 4 of which, the faintest pause, are related by marriage to my own. I move the underage charge be dismissed as inapplicable, and that the question of the seats be referred to the Committee on Precedent. He inclined his head about a centimeter in Harry's direction. I would hate for us to be accused of haste. He's trying to bury it in committee, Daphne said from the rail cheerfully to nobody, at exactly the right volume. Malfoy's neck went stiff. Vote, said Amelia Bones. Amelia, vote, Cornelius. All those in favor of upholding the charge of underage sorcery. 6 hands. 6 out of 111. And Umbridge's was one of them, and it stayed up long after the rest had gone down. Those against. Harry stopped counting at 40. It was a forest. The charge fails, said Amelia Bones, and something in her voice sounded almost like relief. Secrecy charge. The statute does not apply on sovereign goblin ground. Fails. The alleged homicide is out with our jurisdiction, and I will be writing to Gringots today for the deposition. And if I don't like what I read, Mr. Potter, I'll come and find you, and you will not enjoy it. Understood, ma'am. Then this hearing is not yet, said Harry. He hadn't planned to say it. Or, he and Daphne had argued about it for 2 hours on Tuesday night, and she told him flatly not to, that it was greedy, that you take the win and you leave. And then he'd stood in this room and listened to 111 people find out, and he felt 50 pairs of hands close on his in a way that had nothing to do with him. Just hold us, just until we can stand. There's 50 seats in this chamber that haven't been sat in for 300 years, Harry said. I'd like them lit. You cannot possibly propose to, Fudge began. I'm not proposing anything, I'm asking the room. He turned around slowly, taking in the whole rising dark of the tiers. The Wizengamot doesn't grant seats. It never has. It recognizes them. That's what the word means. So recognize them or don't. Vote. On what motion? Said Marchbanks, delighted. That the 50 houses are alive, said Harry, and their seats are his to hold in trust, said Daphne over him, and Harry shot her a look and she shot one straight back that said, in trust. Potter, say in trust or you're a warlord by lunchtime. In trust, Harry said, until each house has a living heir of its own blood to give it back to. That did something. He heard it go around the room, a sound low and surprised. The sound of 100 people rapidly revising an estimate. Those in favor, said Amelia Bones, before Fudge could get his mouth open. It was not close. Harry stood in the middle of courtroom 10 and watched hands go up in the dark, row after row after row, some of them fast and some of them slow, and a few of them, he was quite sure, in pure terror of what would happen if they didn't. And then, at the front, Lucius Malfoy's hand rose in a graceful curve, and he was looking straight at Harry when he did it, and he was smiling very slightly, and Harry understood in that moment that he had just made an anime who an enemy carried, said Amelia Bones. Merlin help us all. Clerk, strike the extinction rulings for the named houses and light the chamber did it itself. High up under the roof, in the parts of the tiers where nobody sat, where the stone had gone dull and the torch brackets had been empty since before the ministry had electricity, 50 brackets ignited at once. The light came down the walls in a slow ring. Harry saw benches he hadn't known were there, carved with names, thick with 300 years of dust, that 50 small gusts of magic were now blowing off in 50 small clouds. He saw a chamber that had been designed for 161 people and had shrunk, quietly, decade by decade, into 111. And nobody had ever once stood up and said, hang on, where did the rest of us go? Somebody in the gallery started crying. There was a very old wizard on the 3rd tier who had got to his feet without seeming to know he'd done it. And then on its own, high up on the right-hand side, in a bracket that Harry had not named and had not asked for and had not counted, a 51st torch caught fire. It burned green. The silence that fell was different from all the other silences that morning. This one had a floor under it that had just given way. That's Slytherin's, somebody said hoarsely. That's the Slytherin seat. It's been dark since 1547. Mr. Potter, said Amelia Bones very carefully, did you claim that one? Harry stared up at the green flame. Something at the very bottom of him. Cold, old, not remotely friendly, turned over and settled. Comfortable, like a dog on a rug. Conquest, said the thing in his hands. You beat him. 4 times. Magic keeps accounts. No, said Harry. It claimed me. They didn't let him out for 40 minutes. There was procedure, and there was Percy Weasley trying to write 50 names into a register that had been closed since 1911, and there was an actual scuffle in the gallery between a prophet photographer and someone from the Quibbler. Sirius got himself formally remanded into Amelia Bones's custody with the air of a man booking a table, winked at Harry, and went off down a corridor between 2 aurors talking cheerfully about how the food had better be an improvement. Harry came out of the courtroom into the dim stone corridor of level 9 and leaned his head back against the wall and breathed. You said in trust, said Daphne, appearing at his elbow. You told me to. Yes, but you said it. She sounded almost annoyed. You have no idea what you just gave away, do you? You had 50 seats and you handed the room a promise that you'd give them all back. Yeah. Why? Harry thought about a basin of black stone with a crack across it. Because they asked me to hold them, he said, not keep them. Daphne looked at him for a second too long, and then away, and busied herself with her book. Well, she said, you're going to be unbearable now. Probably. Also, my father's going to want you at dinner, which will be the worst evening of your life, and my sister will ask you about Quidditch for 2 hours, Mr. Potter. The voice came from further down the corridor, where the torches ran out. He was old. Not Dumbledore old. Older, in a way that didn't show in his skin, which was smooth and rather good, but showed in the way he held himself, like a man standing in a room whose furniture had been rearranged 4 or 5 times since he'd learned the layout. Plum robes, neat white beard, close cut, a silver-topped cane he clearly didn't need. Harry had seen him in the chamber. 3rd tier, right-hand side, 4 seats along. He had voted for the motion. Harry remembered because the man had raised his hand first before anyone, at the very front of the avalanche. Forgive the ambush, the man said. I'm not going to keep you. I imagine you're wanted upstairs by roughly 200 journalists. Do I know you? You don't. He smiled. It was a pleasant smile. Unhurried, the smile of a man who has never once in his life had to be somewhere. I'm on the committee for experimental charms. Nobody knows me. That's rather been the working method. I did want to say congratulations. Genuinely. That was the best hour's work anybody's done in that room since 1876, and I was there for that one too, and it was worse. Beside him, Harry felt Daphne go absolutely still. 50 rings had gone cold on his fingers. All of them. At once. Like 50 hands letting go. You voted for me, Harry said. I did. Why? Because you were going to win, and there is no profit in being counted against a thing that wins. The old man leaned on the cane he didn't need. And because I have been trying to work out, for 6 days, what you are. Whether you're a boy with an accident on his hands or something considerably more inconvenient, and the fastest way to find out was to watch what you asked for when you could have asked for anything. His pale eyes were friendly. Actually friendly. Actually friendly. That was the thing Harry could never explain afterwards. You asked for it in trust. That was interesting. That was very interesting, and it has cost me a night's sleep, and I'm 297 years old and I don't lose many. The corridor was extremely quiet. Vane? Said Harry. Cassius. He put out his hand. I'd say it's a pleasure, but you've killed one of my people this week, and you're going to try to kill several more, so let's not start with a lie. Harry didn't take the hand. You're not even pretending, he said. To what end? You have the file. You know the name. And I am, I hope, going to be able to talk you out of a great deal of unnecessary noise, and that conversation goes much faster if we skip the part where I insult you. Vane withdrew the hand without a flicker. You've inherited 50 debts, Mr. Potter. 50 houses worth of grief, and every one of them is going to want you to do something about it, and you're 15, and you haven't the first idea what they were for. They were for you. They were for peace, said Cassius Vane, and for the first time something moved behind the pleasantness, not anger. Something worse. Tiredness. 6 Dark Lords, boy. 6. I stopped 6 before they got out of the egg, and I did it with what was in that cask, and the world has spent 300 years having no idea how quiet its life has been. He glanced at Harry's hands, and his mouth turned down at one corner, and then a 15-year-old walked over the top of it and took my whole reservoir into his fingers, and now there's a 7th out there with a body and a wand and a very great deal of ambition, and I have nothing left to stop him with. He turned and went 2 steps and stopped. That green torch, he said, without looking round. Slytherin's seat. Every wizard in Britain will read about it in the evening edition, and one of them is going to understand exactly what it means before he finishes the first paragraph. That his name has been taken off him, that he is legally nobody, and that a schoolboy did it by accident. He tapped the cane once on the stone. You got about 4 days, said Cassius Vane. I'd spend them making friends. Chapter 3. The Ledger of Hollow Names Ashdown House had been sitting empty in a Northumberland valley since 1783, and it did not want to be woken up. Harry stood at the end of a drive full of 200 years of leaf fall with his hands in his pockets and looked at it. 40 windows, all black. Ivy in the gutters. A fountain in the forecourt with a stone hair on it worn down to a lump. The gates behind him were still shuddering on their hinges from having got out of his way. Wards, said the goblin at his elbow, unnecessarily. I can feel them. You can feel the top of them, Mr. Potter, which is like feeling the top of a well. Grimsmaw, eyebrows now grown back in patchily, and he had not forgiven anyone for it, spat into the gravel. Ashdown were duellists. This will be Laird. Bloodline recognition, oathlock, a killing floor in the entrance hall if the family had any sense. 2 weeks' work for a proper team, and I want it in writing that I advised against. Harry put his hand on the gatepost. Every window in the house lit at once. Not with candlelight, with something white and cold and startled, 40 rectangles of it flaring against the gray afternoon, and then the ivy came off the front of the building in one enormous sheet, tearing loose from the stone and sliding down into the flower beds with a sound like a wave going out. The fountain choked, coughed, and threw up 8 feet of brown water that went clear halfway up. The front doors opened. Against it, Grimsmaw finished, in a slightly different voice. "It knows me," Harry said. He took his hand off the gatepost and shook it out, because his fingers had gone hot again. "I don't know how to explain it better than that. It's like a dog that's been shut in a room for 200 years. "Yes," said Grimsmaw. "Well, do try to remember that dogs shut in rooms for 200 years occasionally bite." Ron was waiting on the steps with the broom over his shoulder and his mouth open. You just looked at it? I touched a gate. I've been standing here for 20 minutes chucking pebbles at the boundary and they were all coming back at head height," Ron said. "Bill does this for a living, Harry. It takes him weeks. He does surveys. He has a little kit." He looked up at the house, then back at Harry. "Are you going to be like this all summer?" "Probably." "Right," Ron considered. "Can we play Quidditch in the field, or is the field going to eat me?" "Field's fine. I checked." "You checked." "I asked it," said Harry, and went inside before Ron could work out how to be upset about that. It had been 3 days since courtroom 10, and Harry had spent them learning that being recognized by 50 houses meant, mostly, paperwork. The morning after the hearing, 400 owls had arrived at Grimmauld Place, and Mrs. Weasley had opened the window and then closed it again and said something Ginny wasn't supposed to hear. There were invitations. There were legal claims from 6 different families insisting they were cousins of the Wrens. There was a letter from Rita Skeeter that Harry burned unopened, and a letter from Xenophilius Lovegood offering him a 2-page spread and the loan of a hat, and a great many carefully worded notes from men on the Wizengamot who had voted against him at 9 o'clock and remembered by 10:30 that they'd always thought highly of the boy. And there was one, on cheap ministry parchment, that just said, "Amelia Bones will see you Thursday. Bring the girl who reads. S. Black. P.S. The food is dreadful and I have been given a cell with a window. I'm basically at a spa. He's enjoying himself," Remus had said grimly. "That's the worst part. They can't try him without opening 1981, and they can't release him without admitting they got it wrong, so they've stuck him in a holding suite on level 2 with a copy of the Prophet, and he's been sending Amelia Bones a formal complaint about the tea every 4 hours. Harry had picked Ashdown House because it was the biggest of the 19, because it had 30 bedrooms and 40 acres and a wall you couldn't see the end of, and because when he'd said the name out loud in Silverclaw's office, one particular ring on his right hand had gone warm like a mug pressed into his palm. By Wednesday, the Weasleys had moved into the East Wing over Mrs. Weasley's very loud objections, which had lasted right up until she saw the kitchen. Hermione had claimed the library, which had 11,000 volumes and a ladder on rails, and had been in it for 30 hours. Daphne had claimed the map room, which nobody else had known was a map room until she found it, and had immediately covered the great table with the Wizengamot rolls and a chart of who was writing to whom. And at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, Silverclaw arrived by Porky in the forecourt, brushed Scrabble dust off his sleeves, looked up at the house with an expression of professional appraisal, and said, "The ministry has your ledger." They put it to him in the map room, all of them, and it took an hour. "There is no sequestration without a register," Silverclaw said. He had a chair too big for him and it solved the problem by standing on it. You cannot hold 50 houses magic in a cask for 300 years on a handshake. The moment 2 men are involved, there is a book, because the second man does not trust the first. Vane has 9 men. There is a book, and it's not at Gringots. It has never been a Gringots. I have had every Deep Vault manifest since 1690 read twice this week, which has cost me 2 clerks to nervous exhaustion and 1 to resignation. He showed his teeth, but we found the shape of the thing. 41 payments, Mr. Potter, from 41 different vaults, all to the same recipient, 4 times a year going back to 1698. Small sums. Enough to look like a subscription. "Recipient, the Office of the Registrar of Extinct Lines," said Daphne without looking up from her chart. "Department of Mysteries, level 9. Every head turned. "It's in the rolls," she said. "It's a staff list, Potter. Everyone can read it. Nobody does." She pulled a sheet across the table and tapped it. "The Unspeakables keep 3 registries that aren't research. Births with prophecy attached, that's the Hall of Prophecy. Deaths by magical means, that's the Death Chamber. And don't ask me, I've never got a straight answer. And extinct lines. When a house dies, somebody has to write it down because the seat has to go dark and the entailments have to be frozen and somebody has to be legally responsible for the property." She looked up. "The registrar has 1 clerk. He's had 1 clerk since 1698. Same office, same budget line, and the budget line has been paid from outside the ministry the whole time." "They own the office," said Hermione. Her voice sounded scraped. She hadn't slept. "They didn't hide the register. They just put it in the one place where it's the register's job to say those families are dead." "Yes," said Silverclaw. "It is very good work. I admire it." "Don't. Miss Granger, I have been a keeper of compacts for 200 years, and I promise you that hating the craftsmanship will not help you break the box." He turned back to Harry. The ledger of extinct lines is a self-writing instrument. It records the death of a house and the disposition of the house's blood. Every house, yours included. So it'll say what they did to them. It will say what they filed, said Silverclaw, which will be lies. But a self-writing ledger cannot record a lie about blood, Mr. Potter. That is the entire point of it. A ledger that could be lied to would be worthless to the men keeping it. Every entry will have two halves, what the registrar wrote, and what the magic wrote. His yellow eyes did not blink. The second half will list survivors. The room went very quiet. Hermione put both hands flat on the table. When do we go? She said. They went on the Friday morning, at 11, in through the front door with a warrant. That had been Daphne's, and it had taken her 11 hours and 3 books and a screaming argument with Harry at 2 in the morning about the difference between what you were allowed to do and what nobody had ever thought to stop you doing. You're not burgling it, she'd said, jabbing a finger at his chest. The second you break in, you're a boy with 50 stolen seats making a grab at the ministry, and Fudge gets everything he's been praying for. You walk in the front. You sign the visitor book. You make them hand it to you. They won't. They will, because you're not going in as Harry Potter. She'd slapped the book down. Right of inspection of the entailed. It's in the Statute of Wisingdemot Procedure, Section 41. Any lord may inspect, at any reasonable hour, the ministry's records pertaining to the property, blood, and disposition of his own house, and may not be refused, because otherwise the ministry could quietly sell your grandmother's cottage and never tell you. It has never once been used because for 300 years no lord has ever needed to check whether he was extinct. Harry had looked at it for a long time. 50 houses, he'd said. 50 separate rights of inspection. Daphne's eyes had glittered in the lamplight in a way he'd found he liked much more than he was prepared to discuss. Filed simultaneously. One clerk, Potter. There's one clerk in that office, and he's going to have to satisfy 50 legal demands in a single morning, and there is no version of that where the ledger stays shut. So, at 11 o'clock on Friday, Harry Potter walked into the atrium of the Ministry of Magic with Hermione Granger on one side and Daphne Greengrass on the other, and Grimsmaw of Gringots 3 paces behind carrying a document case, and signed the visitor book 51 times. The witch at the desk watched him do it with her mouth slightly open. It's a bit slow, Harry said on about the 40th. Sorry. Take your time, dear, she said faintly. The corridor on level 9 was the same black-tiled corridor he'd walked out of courtroom 10 into, except that this time they turned the other way and went through a plain door and came out into the round black room with the 12 doors and the candles that burned blue. The door swung shut behind them and the walls began to turn. Ron, who had not been on the trip and had been extremely vocal about it and had come anyway, said, "Oh, I hate this. I hate this immediately." "Registry," said Harry. The room ignored him. He waited about 4 seconds, and then he put his hand flat on the wall as it went past, and the wall stopped like it had been grabbed by the collar. Every candle in the room guttered. One of the 12 doors directly behind him made a small, apologetic click and opened by itself. "Cheers," said Harry. "You are insufferable," Daphne murmured. The office of the Registrar of Extinct Lines was a room about the size of a chapel, and it was full of shelves, and every shelf held boxes, and every box held index cards. And behind a desk at the far end sat a small, dry man in gray who did not look up when 4 teenagers and a goblin came through his door. "Closed to the public," he said. "We're not the public," said Harry. "Everyone says that." He turned a card over. "Appointments through the Department of Mysteries Liaison Office, 12 to 16 weeks, and I should tell you that the Liaison Office does not exist." Grimsmaw stepped forward and dropped the document case on the desk from a height of about 6 inches. It sounded like a paving slab. The registrar looked at it. Then, at last, he looked up, and Harry saw the exact instant the man's face went from bored to frightened, and it wasn't when he recognized the scar. It was 2 seconds later when his eyes went down to the hands. 50 notices of inspection under Section 41, said Daphne. 1 per house. Each properly executed, sealed with the signet of the house concerned, and each requiring production of all ministry records touching the blood and disposition of that house, immediately, in the presence of the Lord. She smiled at him. It was not a warm smile. Harry made a note never to be on the receiving end of it. Section 41 has no refusal clause. I checked twice, then I got someone else to check. I'll need to consult. There's nobody to consult, said Harry. You've been the only person in this office since 1698. The registrar went absolutely still. That's not... He wet his lips. The post has been continuously staffed. Same office. Same budget line. Paid 4 times a year out of 41 private vaults. None of them ministry. Harry pulled a chair out from the wall, turned it round, and sat down on it backwards with his arms across the back, 6 feet from the desk, and let his hands hang where the man could see them. I don't actually think you're one of them. I think you're a clerk who's been paid a very small amount of money for a very long time to keep a book tidy and not ask questions, and I think you knew, about 10 years in, that something was wrong, and I think you decided you had a mortgage. The man's throat worked. Cadogan, he said. Wilbur Cadogan. I've been here 41 years. Right, Mr. Cadogan. Harry nodded at the shelves. Where's the ledger? There isn't a Mr. Cadogan. I have a daughter, said Wilbur Cadogan. And that landed in the room like a dropped glass, because it was said the way people say true things, and Harry sat back. Yeah, he said after a moment. All right, then here's the deal, and it's the only one I've got. In about a minute I'm going to find it whether you help me or not, because they didn't build this office to keep me out. They built it to keep out people who don't have 50 rings. If you hand it over, it's a legally compelled production under Section 41, and you're a civil servant who followed the law. And I'll say so under oath, and Amelia Bones will believe me because she's been looking for a reason to be angry all week. He paused. If you don't, I take it, then you're a man who lost it and I don't fancy your chances. Cadogan sat there for a long time. Then he took a key from around his neck and got up and went to the fourth shelf on the left and pulled out a box of index cards and put his hand into the empty slot up to the elbow. The whole wall of shelving swung out on a hinge. Behind it was an alcove, and in the alcove was a lectern, and on the lectern was a book about the size of a paving stone with a cover of gray hide and no title at all. It writes itself, Cadogan said dully. I've never opened it. You'll see, there's a thing on it. I've never even wanted to. What sort of thing? Said Hermione. You'll see, said Cadogan. The ledger of extinct lines did not want to be read, and it took Harry 11 seconds to convince it otherwise. The lock was a blood lock, an old one, a raised sigil in the center of the cover with a groove down it, the kind that opens for a drop from the family concerned and takes the whole hand off anybody else. Grim's maw got about 9 inches away from it with a probe and hissed, and pulled back with the tip of the probe gone black. Blood work, he said. Compound. 9 signatures on the lock, all layered. It will open for any one of the 9 and eat anybody else. Don't. Harry put his palm flat on the cover. Don't. The sigil went white, then red, then made a noise like a small animal, and every ring on Harry's hand lit at once. 50 of them, Harry said through his teeth, because it did hurt, actually. This one hurt, a deep grinding pull like a tooth being turned. 50 families in this book. They've all got a claim on it. You built a lock that opens for the owner, and then you filled it with 50 owners and locked them in the cellar. The cover came up 2 inches and stuck. Harry took his hand off, shook it, hooked his fingers under the edge and pulled, and 300 years of blood magic came apart with a bang that blew every index card in the room off its shelf. They snowed down for nearly a minute. Nobody moved to catch them. The pages inside were vellum, and they were warm, and there was ink moving on them. Not drying, moving, the way water moves at the bottom of a well. Right, said Harry, and turned to the front. A.S. Streech Town. Extinguished 11th of March, 1698. And in the registrar's hand, in ink gone brown with age, house failed of issue. Last of line, Cecily Ashdown, deceased of a wasting sickness, no heirs of body, estates entailed to Crown administration. Seat darkened, and beneath it, in a different ink, silver, in handwriting that was not handwriting at all but something more like frost on glass, untrue. Cecily Ashdown, aged 31, was hollowed at Whitby on the 9th of March, 1698, by C. Vane, T.V., Ruddock and 2 others unnamed. Her magic was drawn into the cradle in 6 hours. She was returned to her house alive and without it, and lived a further 41 years without speech. She bore 2 children by a muggle husband, both without magic. Line continues. Living blood at this date 114. Nobody in that room said anything for a while. Hermione made a noise like she'd been hit in the stomach. They didn't kill them, Harry said. His voice sounded strange to himself. Silverclaw was right. They emptied them and put them back. 114 people, said Ron. There's 114 people walking round right now who are muggles, said Daphne. As far as anyone knows. Muggles with a great-great-great-grandmother who stopped talking in 1698. She had gone the color of paper. Turn the page. He turned it. Brackenridge. Indorak. Extinguished 1714. Untrue. Hollowed at Aberystwyth. Line continues. Living blood at this date, 61. Ceoforminus. 1722. Untrue. Living blood at this date, 9. Mortillici. 1720-41. Untrue. Living blood, 203. W.R. When. 1749. Living blood, 203. When. 1749. Living blood, 40. Halloway. 1755. Living blood, 6dis. The year. 1768. Living blood, 350. On and on. Page after page after page. Every entry the same shape, a tidy lie in brown ink and a cold silver correction underneath, and at the bottom of each, a number, and the numbers added up. And Harry stopped doing arithmetic somewhere north of 2000 because his hands had started to shake and he needed them steady to turn pages. They're all alive, he said. Not the ones who got hollowed. They're kids. They're kids. There's thousands of them. They're just muggles, said Hermione. They're not muggles, said Harry. They're robbed. He looked up and found Hermione's face, and she had already worked out what he worked out. About 4 pages before he had, because, of course, she had. Turn to the G's, she said. Hermione, turn to the G's, Harry. He turned to the G's. Dagworth Granger. Extinguished 1836. Untrue. Hector Dagworth Granger's grandson Aurelius, aged 19, was hollowed at Bristol on the 2nd of June 1836 by C. Vane and 4 others, the family being of interest for the guild's holdings rather than for any Wisenumont seat. He was returned without magic and without memory. His descendants have carried the line dormant for 5 generations. Note appended by the instrument. This line is unstable. The binding has failed twice. It is the nature of the work that where a family is large and the blood spreads wide, the hollowing thins. Living blood at this date, 96. Of these, magical, 1. Hermione read it 3 times. Harry watched her do it. Then she straightened up and folded her arms tightly across herself and said, in a very small, very level voice, "So I'm a leak. Hermione, that's what it is, isn't it? 5 generations of my family walking around as muggles with the magic pressed out of them, and then it seeps, it comes back somewhere, and it came back in me." She laughed, and it came out wrong, and she stopped it fast. And every single time somebody said remarkable for a muggle-born, every time somebody's looked at me like a talking dog, it's because I'm not one. I'm not muggle-born. Ron, I'm a survivor. My family were robbed at Bristol in 1836, and nobody ever told us. And my dad doesn't know. And my grandmother died not knowing, and I've spent 4 years being polite to people who... She stopped. Everyone in the room was looking at her. "I'm all right," she said. "You're really not," said Ron. "No," Hermione agreed, "but I'm going to be in a bit, and then I'm going to be extremely unpleasant to somebody." And that was when Harry noticed the stub. It was between 2 pages, 3/4 of the way through the book. A rough torn edge, maybe a 1/4 inch of vellum left in the gutter. And there was the tail of 1 silver letter on it. He put his thumb on it. Grimsmaw. The goblin came round the lectern, looked, and made a sound in the back of his throat. "That's fresh," he said. 2 days. 3 at most. The fibers haven't laid down." He bent closer, sniffed. "And it was torn by someone the lock let through, or the book would have taken his hand. One of the 9. Harry checked the page numbers. 51 entries in the ledger. He counted them twice because his heart was doing something painful and unhelpful. 50. "They took mine," he said. "They took mine," he said. "They took Peverell," said Daphne. She had gone very still. 2 days ago, Harry. How did they know? Nobody outside this room knew we were coming today. I only finished the Section 41 filings on Wednesday. Somebody guessed, somebody was told, said Grimsmaw. The blue candles in the corridor outside went out, all of them, at once, and the black-tiled floor of the little office lurched a half-inch under their feet, and from somewhere very far above them, 9 floors, through solid rock and stone and enchantment, came a sound like the whole building clearing its throat. Wilbur Cadogan, sitting in his chair among the drifted index cards with his hands in his lap, said quietly, "That's the emergency alarm. That's the one for a breach in the atrium." Harry was already moving. They came up out of the lift into chaos, not fighting. Worse, evacuation. 1,000 people trying to reach 100 fireplaces, someone's shoe on the marble, an oar on a plinth, roaring instructions nobody could hear. The great enchanted ceiling of the atrium had gone black and was running with red, and Harry looked up at it and saw, in letters of fire 50 feet long, moving slowly from one end of the hall to the other like the weather, "Stinks comb. Come and see it burn." "What's stench come?" Ron shouted. Harry didn't answer. His right hand had gone cold, not warm. Cold. The plain iron ring on his little finger. The oldest, the ugliest, the one that had a wry blast in the dream and hit like a hand closing. "Peverell. There's a village," said Daphne, right in his ear, gripping his sleeve. "Cotswolds. It's in the entailments. I read it Tuesday. It's a Peverell holding. Potter, it's a hamlet. There are people in it. It's about 40 cottages and a pub." "How many?" 200. 3? Her fingers dug in. "They're muggles, Harry. The whole village is muggles. The manor's been empty since." Harry pulled his arm free. "Get Bones," he said. "Get anyone. Ron, get Hermione out of here and get her to Ashdown, and don't argue with me." "Wasn't going to," said Ron, white to the lips, hauling Hermione by the elbow. "Harry, don't be clever. No promises." He turned on the spot in the middle of the ministry atrium and disapparated, which he had never been taught to do, which he had never been taught to do, which he had never done in his life, and which he managed on the first attempt because 50 dead families told him where the ground was. He came out on a hill above Stinchcombe at 12:30 on a Friday afternoon in July, and the valley was on fire. Not burning. On fire. The flames were black at the root and green at the tip, and they were going up in columns from the roofs of 40 cottages in a way that fire does not do, straight up, 200 feet, in a ring. In the middle of the ring, on the green, the old Peverell Manor was a shell already, and the walls that were left were running like wax. There were people in the street. That was the thing that stopped his breath. There were people in the street, 60 or 70 of them, herded into the square in front of the pub in their gardening clothes and their aprons and their shirt sleeves, and standing in a loose circle around them were 19 figures in black masks, and above them all, 20 feet in the air, Hanging in the smoke with his robes moving in a wind that wasn't there was Lord Voldemort. "Harry Potter," he said, and the valley said it back off both sides. Harry came down the hill. He did not run. He walked. And behind him on the hillside the grass laid itself flat in a widening wake, and the dry stone wall he passed came apart and went with him. 400 stones rising off the wall line and drifting in a long slow shoal at his shoulder, and by the time he reached the bottom of the hill, the wall was 100 yards long and none of it was on the ground. 2 Death Eaters broke off and came at him from the left. He never turned his head. 40 stones left the shoal at once and went through them at the speed of a bludger, and the 2 of them came apart in the hedgerow, and Harry kept walking. "You have been busy," said Voldemort. He drifted lower. He was smiling, which was the worst thing his face did. "I have read the newspapers. 50 houses. 50 seats. A boy of 15 holds a plurality of the Wiesengemot, and the ministry claps. Let them go. And a green torch," Voldemort said, "burning in a bracket that has been cold since 1547. He came all the way down and touched the cobbles as gently as a leaf. "Do you know what happened to me?" he said conversationally, "at 11 minutes past 9 on the 27th of June? I hope it hurt." "I was in Albania," said Voldemort, "in a house with a book, and at 11 minutes past 9 I stopped being Slytherin's heir." His voice did not rise. It got quieter, and the fire around the square leaned in. 51 years I built that name. I found it in a ruin, and I dug it out with my hands, and I made it the only true thing about me. And a boy standing in a bank asking a goblin for pocket money took it off me like a coat off a peg, because magic, in its wisdom, keeps score of who has beaten whom. 4 times, said Harry. 4 times. Might be 5 in a minute. Voldemort laughed, and every window left in Stinchcombe blew out. "So I burned a house of yours," he said. "And I have put your muggles in a square, because I have learned over 4 years that the fastest way to move you is to leave something soft, where you can see it. I want you here. I want you here in the open, without Dumbledore, without goblins, without a courtroom." "You want to know if I can do it," said Harry. That got through. Just for a second. A flicker at the corner of that flat white face. "Yeah," Harry said. "Course you do. You've been reading about a bloke with 50 houses in his fists, and you don't know if it's real, and you can't sleep, and the not knowing is killing you." He stopped in the mouth of the square, 40 feet away, with 300 stones hanging behind him in the smoke. "So let's find out. Let them go first." "No. Then I'll take them." He didn't say a spell. He hadn't said a spell in 3 days. He raised his left hand palm up, and the cobbles of Stinchcombe Square, every one of them, 1,000 years of them, laid in the rain of somebody remembered, came up in a single sheet under the villagers' feet, like a lifted tray. 70 people rose 8 feet into the air on a floating raft of stone, screaming, and the raft went over the roof of the pub and out of the ring of fire and set itself down in the water meadow beyond with a bump that broke somebody's ankle, and Harry Potter was left standing in a square that was suddenly nothing but bare brown earth, facing 19 Death Eaters and the most feared wizard in the world. "Kill him," said Voldemort. 19 wands came up. Harry brought his hands together. Later, much later, the Ministry investigators' report on Stinchcombe would use the phrase "a sustained displacement event of unprecedented magnitude," and Amelia Bones would put her monocle down and say, "It says here," he clapped. The pressure wave went out in a ring at ground level. It took the black fire off the cottages the way you blow out a match, all 40 at once. It took 19 Death Eaters off their feet and carried them backwards into walls, into hedges, into the churchyard, into the river. It took the entire front of the burnt-out manor and folded it flat. It went up the hill and stripped the hedgerow bare and kept going. And 3 miles away in Dursley, a woman hanging out washing felt a hot wind on her face and wondered about the weather. Voldemort did not move. He stood in the middle of it with his robes streaming and his feet exactly where they had been, and when the noise stopped, he was still smiling, and he said, with something that was almost affection, "So it is real." "Yeah," said Harry. "Then let us not waste it." They went at each other across 40 feet of bare earth, and for 11 seconds it was the fastest thing that had ever happened in that valley. Voldemort was better. That was the thing Harry never told anyone afterwards. Not Sirius, not Hermione. Voldemort was 50 years better. Every movement economical, every spell chosen, 3 curses in the time Harry managed one, layering them. A killing curse hidden inside a wall of hornets, hidden inside a lie of a shield. He fought like a man doing arithmetic. Harry lost skin off his left arm in the first 2 seconds, and something clipped his ribs in the 4th, and he never even saw what it was. But Harry Potter did not have to be better. He had 50 houses in his hands, and every one of them had been waiting 300 years for somebody to hit something. The killing curse came at his face, and he caught it, closed his fist round it, and the green light went out between his fingers like a candle in a gale, and Voldemort's expression finally changed. Harry threw the river at him. The whole river, 400 yards of the Stinchcombe Brook, came out of its bed in a rope of brown water and hit Lord Voldemort in the chest at the speed of a train and drove him backwards through the churchyard wall, and Harry walked after it with the stones of that wall reassembling into a fist 40 feet high above his head. The fist came down. Voldemort blasted it into gravel and came up out of the wreckage with his wand up and his face no longer smiling at all, and put a curse through Harry's shoulder that felt like an iron bar, and Harry took it, and closed the last 10 feet, and did the thing that 50 voices in his fingers had been screaming at him to do since the first second. He grabbed Voldemort's wand hand, bare skin, both of them, and every single one of the 50 rings bit. Voldemort screamed. It was not a sound anyone in the world had ever heard him make. He screamed like something being unmade, and his skin blistered white under Harry's fingers, and the U-wand cracked from tip to core with a report like a shot. And a scar on Harry's forehead split open and poured, and through it Harry felt something enormous and cold flinch away from him, recoil. And then he saw them. For about a second and a half, through the contact, through the bird, a cup, a locket, a ring on a rotten hand under a floorboard, a diadem in a room full of junk, a book with a hole in it, screaming, a snake, and behind them all, hanging in the dark, something in the shape of himself with a lightning scar. 6, said 50 voices in his hands, in a kind of horror. 6. He split 6 ways. You cannot kill him. He isn't all here. Harry let go and staggered back with blood in his eye. Voldemort was on his knees. His right hand was ruined, black to the wrist, the fingers curled and smoking, and he was breathing in a shallow, animal way. And for the first time in 50 years, Lord Voldemort looked up at someone. "What are you?" he whispered. "I'm the bloke who's got your seat," said Harry. He raised his hand for the last time, and the world went white, because 11 feet to his left, a portkey went off, a great greasy tearing rip in the air, cast by someone on the ground, one of the 19, some anonymous Death Eater lying broken in the churchyard, with just enough left in him to do the one thing he'd been ordered to do if it went wrong, and Voldemort was gone. The bare earth where he'd knelt, sighed, and closed. Harry stood in the ruin of Stinchcombe Square, with his shoulders smoking and his face full of blood. "SIX?" he shouted at his own hands. 50 rings said nothing at all. There were 41 Aurors in that valley within the hour, and Amelia Bones arrived at 2:10 and found Harry Potter sitting on the churchyard wall he'd rebuilt, letting a paramedic witch put dittany on his arm, while 300 muggles in a water meadow were being very gently made to forget. She looked at the square, then at the cottages, all 40 of them standing, scorched to the eaves and none of them burnt through. 19 bodies, she said. 14, said Harry. The other 5 are alive. They're in the river. Someone should probably get them out. 14 dead Death Eaters, 300 living muggles, and a hamlet that ought to be a crater. She took the monocle out and rubbed her eye. Do you know what the minister is going to say about this? That I did it myself for the publicity. That's exactly what he's going to say, said Amelia Bones. And I'm going to stand next to him while he says it, and then I'm going to go back to my office and lock the door and have a very large drink. She glanced at the sky. 14 at 15 years old. Are you all right? Harry looked at his hands. No, he said. Ask me next week. Said Amelia Bones, and left it, and Harry decided he liked her enormously. He got back to Ashdown House at 9:30 that night to find every window lit, and Molly Weasley in the hall with her wand out and murder in her eye, and Hermione crying and furious about it, and Ron sitting on the stairs holding the evening edition, which had gone out at 7 with the headline, Potter's Fimted Where, Forden Dead and Cotswold Massacre Where, Forden Dead and Cotswold Massacre, and no mention anywhere of the 300 people in the meadow. Daphne was in the map room, alone, standing over the table with the ledger open in front of her. She hadn't turned the lamps on. You should be in bed, Harry said from the doorway. He knew where you'd be today. She didn't turn round. Not Voldemort. Voldemort just needed you out of the ministry, and Stinchcombe was in every gossip column this week, because it's a Peverell holding. Anyone could have picked it. Her voice was completely flat, and Harry felt his stomach drop, because he had spent 2 weeks learning what Daphne Greengrass sounded like, and she had never sounded like this. Vane knew. Somebody told Vane we were filing Section 41 and he had 2 days to get into that office and tear a page out. You said only the 6 of us knew. I said nobody outside this room knew, said Daphne. I was wrong. 7 people knew. She turned round. She had a letter in her hand. On Wednesday night, I couldn't remember whether an inspection notice needed the house seal or the personal seal, because it's a stupid distinction and nobody's used the section since 1704. So I wrote to the only other person alive who's read the whole statute of procedure. She held it out. My father. Daphne. There's a healer in Vienna, she said. There's a healer in Vienna who deals in blood curses, and my sister Astoria is going to be dead before she's 30, and we have been on a waiting list for 4 years because we are 1 seat from ruin and it costs 11,000 galleons a year and we cannot pay it. She was not crying. That was somehow worse. So on Wednesday night, my father wrote to a man on the Committee for Experimental Charms who has been very kind to him since the hearing and told him, I know exactly what he'd have told him, Potter, he'd have thought he was being clever. That the Potter boy was making a legal move on the registrar and it would be worth watching, and could he possibly advise? That's not selling me. It's exactly selling you. It just doesn't feel like it from the inside, which is how it's done. Her jaw was rigid. And this came at 8 o'clock. She dropped the letter on the ledger. Harry picked it up. Heavy paper, no crest. My dear Cyrus, I have made the arrangements we discussed. Vienna will see your daughter on the 14th and the account is settled through to 1999. There is no debt. Consider it a courtesy between colleagues. Do give my regards to your clever girl. CV Harry read it twice. He didn't even ask for anything, he said. He doesn't have to. Daphne's hands were shaking now. She noticed and put them behind her back. He's paid for Astoria's life. Next time he writes and asks my father a question, my father will answer it and he'll tell himself it's nothing. And he'll be right. It'll be nothing. It'll be a date or a name. And that's all it ever needs to be. She looked up and her eyes were bright and absolutely steady. She looked up and her eyes were bright and absolutely steady. That's how the quorums run for 300 years, Potter. Not with the imperious, with invoices. The house was quiet around them. Where is he now? Harry said. In his study in Wiltshire, I should think, feeling relieved. She swallowed. I haven't told him I know. I came here instead, which I imagine is the last useful thing I'll ever be allowed to do, so get it over with. Tell me to go. Harry set the letter down. No, he said. Don't be stupid, Daphne. He waited until she stopped. You could have burned that. You could have burned it, and I'd never have known, not ever, and you'd have gone on sitting in that chair being the cleverest person in the building. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand and found blood still crusted at his hairline. You came and put it on the table. So no, I'm not telling you to go. I'm telling you your dad's a liability, and we're going to have to work round him, and I'm telling you I'm buying that healer in Vienna, out from under Vane by Tuesday. Because I own a 12th of Diagon Alley at 11,000 galleons is what I owe the goblins for a wall. Daphne Greengrass opened her mouth and nothing came out of it. Also, Harry said, next time just ask me about the seals. I've got 50 of them. You wouldn't have known the answer. No, he agreed, but I'd have been amazing company. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else entirely and put her hand over her mouth and turned away, and Harry very sensibly found something to look at on the far wall for a while. They gathered in the library at midnight, all of them, because Harry asked and nobody was sleeping anyway. Hermione sat on the arm of a chair with her knees up, red-eyed, still holding the page from the ledger she'd copied out 4 times in her own handwriting as though repetition would make it belong to her. 96 living, she said. Of these, magical 1. Yeah, said Harry. There are 95 people who share my blood and can't do this. She turned her hand over and made a small light in her palm and looked at it as though it had been shoplifted. Because a man went to Bristol in 1836. 2,411, said Daphne from the table. She'd been adding up for an hour. Across the 50. Give or take, because the numbers are as of today and the book updates. 2,500 people walking around Britain and France thinking they're muggles, and their families were farmed. Ron whistled low. So what do we do? He said. You can't just. Harry, you can't go and knock on 2,000 doors. No, said Harry. He got up and went to the window and stood there for a bit with his hands on the sill, and the old glass rippled the moonlight over Ashdown's 40 dark acres, and behind him 50 faceless voices waited. The way they had been waiting since before America existed. Just hold us, they'd said. Just until we can stand. I told the Wiesengemot I'd hold the seats in trust, he said, until every house had an heir of its own blood to give it back to. He turned round, and I'd been thinking about that all the way home from Stinchcombe, and here's the thing. I thought that was a promise about the future. Something for when I'm 40 and everyone's forgotten. Something safe. He looked at his hands. It's not though, is it? He said. The heirs are in the book. They've always been in the book. Vane's known where every single one of them was for 300 years. That's why there's a book. That's why they had to keep accounts, so they'd know which families were getting too big and needed thinning. His voice had gone hard. 2,500 names and addresses, and I'm the only one who's got a copy. Hermione's head came up very slowly. Harry, she said. What are you going to do? Harry crossed the room and stopped in front of her, and started working at a ring on his right hand. The small dull one, 3rd finger, silver gray with a green stone, the one that had hummed when she'd walked into the room the first night, and that he had thought at the time was a coincidence. It came off. It came off like it had been waiting to, sliding over the knuckle that had refused a goblin, a chisel, and a cutting charm, and it sat in his palm and glowed faintly, and every other ring on his hands went hot at once in what he could only describe as applause. Give me your hand, he said. Harry, Hermione. He was smiling. It felt strange and enormous on his face after the sort of day he'd had. 96 living, of these, magical 1. He held it out. House Dagworth Granger's got an ear. She's had one for 4 years. Nobody told the paperwork. Hermione Granger looked at the ring in his hand for a very long moment. Then she stuck her hand out, and it was steady as stone. Chapter 4. 50 wands. The ring went on Hermione Granger's finger at 14 minutes past midnight, and Ashdown House put every light out. 40 windows, the hall lamps, the fire in the library grate, all of it gone at once, and for about 3 seconds the only thing in the world was the sound of Ron saying, "What?" in the dark, and the small silver-green glow of a signet on a girl's hand. Then it came back, all at once. brighter than before, and the chandelier over the library was swinging. Hermione stood in the middle of the room with her arm held out straight in front of her like it belonged to someone else. Her hair had come up off her shoulders and was drifting. Her eyes were enormous. "Oh," she said. "Hermione? Don't talk for a second." She turned her hand over. Her voice had gone thin and strange and rather high. "There's someone in here." "Yeah," said Harry. "There's 95 of them." "No, there's—" She stopped. Her chin went. "There's a man. He's about 19, and he's frightened, and he's been trying to say something for 189 years, and he can't remember any words, Harry. They took his words." Ron got to her before Harry did. She grabbed his sleeve with her free hand and held on hard. "Aurelius," she said. "It's Aurelius. He was 19. It says 19 in the book." She was crying and laughing at once, which was awful to watch. He's remembering it, Bristol. There were 5 of them, and they had a chair with straps on it, and he thought it was about money. He thought they were bailiffs. He let them in and made them tea. "Sit her down," said Daphne, already dragging a chair over. They sat her down. It took about 4 minutes for it to pass, and when it did, Hermione sat very still with her hands in her lap and the ring bright on her finger, and her whole face changed in a way Harry couldn't have described, but never forgot. "It's not 50 families," she said. "I know. You don't know you've had 50 of them in a lump. You've had them all shouting at once. I've got one, and I can hear him." She looked up. "Harry, they're all still in there. Every one of them. Every single person who sat in that chair is still in the ring, and they've been awake the entire time." Nobody said anything. "Right," said Ron, eventually, and his voice wasn't steady either. "So how fast can we do the other 49? It took 11 days, and it was the strangest fortnight of Harry Potter's life. And afterwards, the bit he remembered clearest wasn't the magic. It was the doorsteps. They did it in teams. Grimsma and 2 Gringots clerks worked the ledger, matching silver ink to Muggle registries. Births, marriages, deaths, electoral rolls, a whole clattering apparatus of ordinary paperwork that turned out to be a better tracking charm than anything in the wizarding world. Daphne took the rolls and worked out which houses would cause the biggest earthquake in the chamber. Remus drove because Remus was the only adult in the operation who could pass for a normal Englishman in a car. The first was a woman named Cecily Ashdown Cooper, 61, retired district nurse, Whitby. The name had come down 200 years intact, and nobody in her family knew why they kept using it. She made them tea. She listened to Harry explain badly for 11 minutes about a house in Northumberland and a woman with her name who had stopped speaking in 1698. Then she said, "Love, I've had a funny feeling about that town my whole life," and put the ring on at her own kitchen table, and the row of copper pans over her cooker rang like a peal of bells, and Cecily Ashdown Cooper sat down on the lino and wept for about a quarter of an hour while her cat walked round her in circles with its fur standing on end. "Is it always like that?" she said afterwards, mopping her face with a tea towel. "Second time I've done it," said Harry. "So, probably." "And I'm a what? Sorry." "Lady Ashdown, you've got a house and a seat in Parliament. Sort of Parliament." "I've got a bungalow," said Cecily Ashdown Cooper, and then looked at her hand and said, "Oh, hell," in the voice of a woman who had just realized she would have to tell her sister. There was a lorry mechanic in Coventry called Danny Wren who took the news with total calm, put the ring on, blew the doors off his own garage, and said brilliant with the shakiest grin Harry had ever seen. There was a retired barrister in Bath, Vasseur on her mother's side, who cross-examined Harry for 2 hours about the legal standing of the ledger before she touched it, and then turned out to be the single most useful person they recruited. There was a Corvinus, 9 living, the smallest line in the book, who was a 19-year-old busker in Cardiff sleeping in a hostel, and Harry gave him a ring and a house with 60 rooms in it on the same afternoon and had to sit down on a curb afterwards. 3 said no. That was the part nobody had planned for. A man in Leeds shut the door in Remus's face. A family in Kent listened to the whole thing, politely, and the mother said, "We're Methodists." And that was that. And an old woman in Prague looked at the Holloway ring for a long time and said in careful English, "My grandmother was very unhappy. I do not want the thing that made her unhappy." And Harry said, "Fair enough," and left it with her anyway, in a box, in case. "You should have pushed," said Daphne in the car. "No, 3 seats, they're not seats," said Harry. "They're people's grandmothers." Daphne looked out of the window for a while. "You're going to be a nightmare to manage," she said. "Yeah." He got Sirius out on the 5th day, and he did it with paperwork, which Sirius found deeply insulting. The trick was Griselda Marchbanks, who had wanted to be seen being brave since June, and Tiberius Ogden, who had wanted the same thing since 1994, and 11 brand new lords and ladies who had been magical for less than a week and had no idea that you weren't supposed to simply propose things. Harry filed the motion on Tuesday. It said in Daphne's flat legal prose that no person might be held on remand for a crime for which no trial record existed, and that the Wizengamot required, within 7 days, either the transcript of the 1981 conviction of Sirius Orion Black or his immediate release. There was no transcript. Everybody in that room knew there was no transcript. That was rather the point. Fudge fought it for 90 minutes and lost 68-31, and Amelia Bones walked Sirius out through the atrium herself at 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon in front of every photographer in Britain, which, Daphne pointed out, meant the ministry got to look merciful instead of incompetent, which was the only reason it had worked at all. 12 years, Sirius said on the steps, blinking in the sun. He'd shaved. It had aged him about a decade and taken about 2 off. 12 years, and it turns out all I needed was a form. Section 19, said Daphne. I'd like to meet whoever wrote Section 19 and hit him. He died in 1841. Typical. Molly Weasley hugged him in the atrium in front of 200 people, and Sirius stood there like a man being diffused. Then he found Harry in the crowd and got an arm round his neck and said into his ear quietly, "Right, now tell me the bit you've been leaving out of the letters." So Harry told him about the 6. They walked the whole length of the atrium and out to the visitors' entrance and up onto a London pavement in the July heat while he said it, the cup, the locket, the ring, the diadem, the diary, the snake, and the 7th thing hanging behind them in the dark with a lightning scar on it. Sirius stopped walking. Say the last one again. You heard it. Harry, I've had 2 weeks with it, said Harry. I've had 50 people in my hands screaming about it for 2 weeks, and here's what I've got. It's in there. It's been in there since I was 1. It's not me, and it doesn't get a say, and when the rest of them are gone, we'll work out how to get it out. And if it turns out there's only one way to do that, then I'd quite like to have had the summer first. He shrugged, and it came out steadier than he felt. That's the whole plan. I'm not pretending it's a good one. Sirius stood on Great Scotland Yard Street with his hands over his mouth for a moment. Your mother, he said, would have taken that plan apart in about 40 seconds. Probably. She'd have been right, too. He dropped his hands. Diary's gone. You did that at 12, God help us. Ring. Dumbledore'll know where the Gaunts lived. Locket. His face did something complicated. Locket's in my drawing room, isn't it? Big gold thing. Opens for nobody. Creature's been guarding it like it's the crown jewels and screaming at anyone who touches it. Regulus. What? My brother. Sirius said it like the word had corners. He went missing in 1979 and nobody ever found a body, and I've spent 16 years assuming he was a coward who ran. He set off walking again, fast, the way he did when he was upset. Come on, I want to ask an elf a question. Vane came to Ashdown House on the 9th day, at 4 in the afternoon, up the drive on foot in a summer coat with his cane and no wand in his hand. Harry watched him come from the library window. 26 new lords and ladies of ancient houses were currently in his forecourt learning to apparate off a chalk circle Remus had drawn on the gravel, and Cassius Vane walked through the middle of them and said, "Good afternoon" to 2 of them and touched his hat. He's just walking in, said Ron. Words let him, said Harry. I have to close them, and if I close them, he's proved the point he's come to make. Which is, that he doesn't have to knock. They met in the Great Hall because it was the coldest room in the house and Harry wanted him uncomfortable, which turned out to be a waste of effort because Cassius Vane appeared incapable of discomfort. He looked around at the hammer-beam roof and the rehung portraits with the pleasure of a man revisiting a favorite gallery. They've done the Ashdown arms wrong over the fireplace, he said. 3 martlets, not 4. It was a running joke in the family. They always paid the stonemason too little. I knew Cecily's brother. He gambled. Do you want a chair? I want 20 minutes. Vane took the chair anyway, sat, crossed his legs, and set the cane against his knee. You've undone 11 days of my life's work. May I ask how many so far? 29. 29. He said it thoughtfully. No heat at all. And Fudge has stopped answering my letters, which is a novelty. Lucius Malfoy has begun answering them with extraordinary warmth, which is worse. And the prophet is running a piece on Sunday about a district nurse in Whitby. You will forgive me if I skip the part where I threaten you. You couldn't anyway. No, Vane agreed, which is precisely the difficulty, and it's the difficulty I've come to explain, because you have solved a moral problem and created a practical one, and nobody in your house appears to be doing the arithmetic. He looked up. How long have I got, Mr. Potter? Sorry. How long have I got to live? Go on. You've had a fortnight with the ledger. You've a goblin doing your sums, and I'm quite sure the question has occurred. Harry didn't answer. 297 years, said Vane. I was born in the reign of William and Mary, and I have not eaten a mouthful of magic that wasn't stolen since I was 61 years old. When the cask cracked, I stopped drinking. 9 of us stopped drinking. He held up his left hand, and Harry saw, for the first time, that the skin over the knuckles was wrong. Thin, papery, the color of a wasp's nest. Ruddock died on the 4th of July. Vosper on the 9th. Aurelia Sallow. Yes, that Sallow, we kept one of the families she asked to be kept. Went yesterday morning and she was 240 and she came apart like a moth in a fist. There are 6 of us. There will be 4 by the end of the month, and I will be the last because I was always the greediest. You want me to be sorry? God, no. Vane laughed, and it was a real laugh, warm, and Harry hated how much he didn't hate it. I want you to understand that I am not here to bargain for my life, because my life is over and I've had 8 of yours. I'm here about the 7th. The hall was very quiet. Out on the gravel, somebody apparated badly and a lot of people cheered. 6 Dark Lords in 300 years, Vane said. You know the number. Here's the part nobody's told you. Not one of them was stopped in a duel. Not one. You don't beat a man like that with a wand, Mr. Potter. You beat him with time. You find the family before it ripens, you empty it, and you put it back on the shelf, and no one ever writes a ballad about it because nothing happened. He leaned forward. In 1911, a boy in Yorkshire was going to be the worst thing this country ever produced. I know that because I watched his mother, and I watched his grandmother, and the arithmetic was not ambiguous. He grew up to be a moderately unpleasant solicitor who died of a heart attack in 1963. That was me. That was my crime. And in 1926 I missed one, because the mother ran to London and died in a Muggle orphanage under a name I didn't have, and that single administrative failure has now killed 4,000 people. Don't. You've met him, said Vane. You've had your hands on him. So tell me, how did that end? Harry said nothing. Ah, said Vane softly. You saw them, didn't you? The pieces. Every ring on Harry's hands went cold at once. You know about that. I have known since 1981, when he failed to have the decency to die in Godric's Hollow. Vane's voice had lost its warmth. It's not complicated arithmetic, boy. A man who cannot die has done something to himself, and there is only one thing a man does to himself for that. I did not know how many. I assumed 1. 6s. He stopped, and for the first time in the conversation, Cassius Vane looked genuinely, unguardedly appalled. 6 is obscene. 6 is a man who has thought about it and found it pleasant. So help me. I am helping you, that's the whole of my errand. I have 4 weeks and a filing cabinet, and I am going to give you the filing cabinet. He tapped the cane once. 300 years of surveillance on every dark family in Britain, France, and the Balkans. Every property Riddle's people bought under another name since 1946. Every vault. Every hole in the ground. My people watched Malfoy take delivery of a book in 1981, and I have the date. Mr. Potter, I have the courier's name. And what do you want? The cradle refilled. There it was. Not with your 50, Vane said, before Harry could speak, quickly, and Harry noted that the first hurried thing he'd said. That's done. I concede it. You've won, and honestly I'm not sure I'd take it back if you offered 50 ghosts and a district nurse in Whitby. Fine. He spread his hands. I want yours. Right. You are the largest single accumulation of magic that has ever stood on this island. And you are 15, and you are extremely angry, and I have spent 300 years quietly removing people considerably less alarming than you. Half of what you're carrying would keep the cask full for 2 centuries, and you would still be the strongest wizard alive by a distance nobody could measure. Vane's pale eyes did not move. You would not even notice it going, and every Grindelwald born between now and the 23rd century would be strangled quietly in his cot by someone who is not you. And you'd hold it. I'd be dead in a month, so no. A thin smile. Someone would. That's rather the point of an institution. Harry stood up. Here's what I keep coming back to, he said. You could have asked. Vane blinked. I beg your pardon? 300 years. Cecily Ashdown. 19-year-old Aurelius in Bristol, who let you in and made you tea. Harry's voice didn't rise, and behind him, quietly, every window in the great hall frosted over. You had an argument. You've got a good one, actually. It's the best argument I've heard from anyone this summer, and I've been talking to Dumbledore. So you could have gone to those 50 families and made it. You could have stood in front of the Wiesengumat in 1698 and said, here's the arithmetic, who volunteers? And some of them would have said yes. Aurelius Sallow said yes, you just told me, so you knew it was possible and you did it once and then you never did again, because asking is slow and you can't be sure, and it's so much easier to knock on a door with 4 men in a chair with straps on it. 91 people volunteered would not have been enough. Then you'd have failed honestly, said Harry, and Grindelwald would still have happened, and it would have been somebody else's fault, and I'd have some sympathy for you. Vane sat quite still. You're a moralist, he said. That's disappointing. I'd hoped you were a pragmatist wearing a moralist's coat. They're so much easier to talk to. I'm neither. I'm 15. Harry picked up the poker and put it back down, because his hands wanted something to do. I'll take the filing cabinet. I'll take everything you've got on Riddle and I'll say thank you and I'll pay for it. I'll pay for Aurelius Sallow's family, whoever's left, and I'll pay whatever your 4 men want to be looked after in whatever's left of their lives. That's the deal. Nobody gets emptied. Then he wins, said Vane. Then I do it the hard way. Cassius Vane got up. He did it slowly and used the cane, and Harry realized with a jolt that he hadn't needed it in the ministry corridor a fortnight ago and needed it now. At the door he stopped. I've enjoyed this, he said, and appeared to mean it. I want you to know that. It has been 300 years since anybody in this country was worth a proper conversation. Dumbledore would have taken the deal in 1946 if I'd had the wit to offer him this one. He set his hat on his head. 2 of my 4 are not going to accept your kindness, Mr. Potter. They've been alive a very long time, and they found they like it. You should assume they will come for you before the month is out, and you should assume they are better at this than the man in the bank. because the man in the bank was a clerk with a wand, and they are what I made when I was still young enough to make things properly. And you? Oh, I'll come with them, said Vane. One doesn't send the boys alone. He called the session for the 29th of July. That was Daphne's arithmetic too, and it was brutal. 41 heirs found and seated by the 28th. 41 houses that couldn't vote until the Wizengamot formally received their lords, and the Wizengamot summer recess beginning on the 1st of August, which meant that if Fudge could stall 11 days, he'd have until October to unpick the whole thing with committees. He'll try to keep the chamber shut, Daphne said, over the map table at 2 in the morning with her hair falling down. He can refuse a session. 50 seats can compel one, but he can put it in courtroom 10, which holds 160 and no press. And then it's a stuffy dungeon and a procedural knife fight, and we lose 4 of the new ones because they're scared. Potter, they've been magical for a fortnight, so we don't do it in courtroom 10. You can't hold the Wizengamot anywhere else. It's in the Wizengamot shall sit in such place within the ministry as the chief warlock shall appoint, said Harry. Daphne stopped. You read it. I've had a very boring fortnight in a car with Remus. He grinned at her. Dumbledore's still chief warlock. Fudge has been trying to sack him since October and hasn't managed it, and Dumbledore said he wouldn't help me, but I don't reckon that covers choosing a room. Dumbledore's reply came back within the hour on a scrap of parchment in violet ink. The atrium. 9 o'clock. Bring everyone. 9 o'clock. Bring everyone. APWBDPS. I find that I have been looking forward to this for 40 years without knowing it. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic on the 29th of July at 9 in the morning held 900 people, and it should not have held any of them. They'd cleared the floor between the fountain and the Golden Gates, and set out the Wizengamot's benches in a great horseshoe under the peacock blue ceiling, and the public had been let in behind ropes on 3 sides, and the press had a pen by the fireplaces, and it was already about 6 degrees too hot. Every ministry employee who could invent a reason to be in the atrium was in the atrium. The lifts had been running all night. Harry stood at the head of a column of 41 people at the visitors' entrance and looked back down the line and had a moment of pure vertigo. A retired district nurse in her best coat, a lorry mechanic in a suit he'd bought on Tuesday and clearly hated, a barrister from Bath with a briefcase, a busser from Cardiff who had cut his hair for this and looked like a plucked bird, 2 brothers from Rouen who spoke no English and had brought their mother, a woman who ran a garden center near Alley, a retired copper, a geography teacher, a boy of 17 who had been working in a fish shop in Whitstable 8 days ago and was currently, technically, Lord Mortlake, holder of the 11th oldest seat in Wizarding Britain. 41 of them, and 40 of them had not known magic existed a fortnight ago, and every single one of them was terrified, and not one of them had backed out. Right, said Harry. Speech, said Ron. No. He looked down the line again. Cecily, yes, love. If it goes wrong in there, you're in charge of getting everybody out through the fireplaces, all right? Green powder, say it clearly, don't panic. I've run a ward on a Saturday night, said Cecily Ashdown Cooper. I'll manage. They walked in. The sound that went up when they came through the gates was not applause. It was something rougher than that. A great collective intake, 900 people seeing 41 strangers in ill-fitting robes walking into the atrium behind a boy with 50 rings, and then somebody near the fountain started clapping and it went round the hall like fire in a hayfield. Dumbledore stood at the head of the horseshoe in purple, with his hands raised and let it run for a full minute before he brought it down. This chamber, he said, was designed in 1707 for 161 members. For most of my lifetime it is seated 111, and I have never once heard anybody ask why. He let that sit. Today we shall find out. Clerk, the roll. Percy Weasley stood up with a scroll and read out 41 names, and they came forward one at a time, and each one put a ring on the clerk's table and said 6 words, I claim my house and its seat. And each time, high up in the dark under the enchanted ceiling, a light came on. The 17th was a mechanic from Coventry, who got halfway through the words, stopped, said sorry, and started again, and got a laugh that turned into a cheer. The 23rd was Hermione Granger. She said it in a voice that carried to the back of the hall, and when she stepped away from the table she was crying, and she did not wipe her face and half the press pen was on its feet. The 38th was the boy from the fish shop in Whitstable, who dropped his ring. The 40th was the busker from Cardiff. The 41st was a woman of 79 who had flown from Prague overnight and had changed her mind at 11 o'clock the night before, and who said the 6 words in accented English with her chin up and her hand shaking. 41 houses restored, said Percy Weasley, and his voice cracked on it and he didn't care. 152 active seats, the Wizengamot is at its greatest strength since 1698. Cornelius Fudge sat in the middle of the horseshoe in his lime green bowler and did not clap. Now, said Dumbledore, the business. And Harry stepped up to the clerk's table and started taking rings off his fingers. He'd meant it to be quiet. He'd meant to just hand them over. But the first ring came off. Corvinus, silver, worn smooth, and the sound it made when he set it on the table was audible in the back row, a small clean chime like a wine glass, and by the third one, the entire atrium had gone silent to listen, 900 people breathing, and the chimes came one after another for a minute and a half. And Harry Potter gave away the greatest concentration of magical power in the Inferte. 3 he kept, because 3 families had said no and somebody had to hold those and he told the chamber so. He kept Peverell. The last ring came off and his hands were empty and light and cold, and the noise that went up in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic went on for 4 minutes. And Harry stood there in the middle of it feeling like a man who has put down a rucksack at the end of a very long walk. Then he said into the noise, "Right, one more thing," and it took another minute to get quiet. "The Slytherin seat," he said. The hall went cold. "It came to me by conquest, and I don't want it, and I'm not keeping it." He looked up at the green torch burning under the ceiling, and thought about a locket in a drawing room, and a snake and a face in the smoke at Stinchcombe. "I'm putting it in trust with the Chief Warlock, to be held for the House of Slytherin until a Slytherin turns up who's actually worth it, which will happen." He glanced sideways, entirely deliberately, at a girl in gray at the front of the public rope. "I've met some." Daphne Greengrass in front of 900 people went the color of a postbox. "And last," said Harry, "I'd like to put a motion to the floor." "You have no seat, Mr. Potter," said Fudge, with the desperation of a man reaching for the one rule he had left. "You've just given them all away. I've got Peverell." "And a first reading requires the support of 12 members, said the barrister from Bath, standing up. "House Vassar seconds." "House Ashdown seconds," said Cecily. "House Wren." "House Mortlake." The boy from the fish shop on his feet, voice cracking. "House Dagworth Granger," said Hermione, "and I'd like it noted that I've read the thing and it's about 400 years overdue." Harry put his hand on the table and said the words he'd promised a goblin in an office under Charing Cross Road. "Repeal of Clause 4 of the Statute of Wand Restriction, 1631, he said. "Goblins get wands." The uproar hit the ceiling. And that was the moment the fireplaces went out. All of them, every grate in the atrium at once, and the flames didn't die. They were sucked, pulled backwards down the flues with a noise like a great indrawn breath, and the golden gates at the far end of the hall slammed shut, and every one of the 20 lifts thumped to a stop between floors. For about 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then the fountain exploded. Not water. The statues, the witch and the wizard, the centaur, the goblin, the house elf, 5 tons of gold, burst outward off the plinth, and Harry threw his arm up and shoved, and 4 of them went into the ceiling and hung there. And the 5th, the goblin, came down through the presspan and there was screaming. "Out!" Harry roared. "Cecily! Go!" The Death Eaters came up out of the floor. That was the thing nobody in the ministry had ever considered, because it was insane. The atrium sat on top of the Department of Magical Transportation, and the Flu Network Authority's regulation of the grates worked one way. And if you were willing to blow a 15-foot hole through the marble from beneath, you could put 40 men in the middle of the British government in 9 seconds. Marble went up. People went down. The horseshoe of Riesengamot benches came apart as 150 of the oldest, richest, and most consistently useless witches and wizards in Britain scrambled backwards over their own seats, and out of the hole in the floor of the atrium, in a column of green smoke, rose Lord Voldemort with a new wand in his hand and his ruined right arm hanging. "The boy," he said. 6 things happened in the next 4 seconds, and Harry was only responsible for 2 of them. Dumbledore moved, actually moved, and Harry had never in his life seen it. A flick of the arm and a wall of white fire 50 feet long that came down between the hole in the floor and 900 civilians and stayed there, roaring, while the Chief Warlock walked along its length like a man checking a fence. Sirius Black went straight over 3 benches and put a Death Eater into the wall. Amelia Bones started shouting for auras in a voice that reached level 2. Hermione Granger, who had been a witch of a restored house for 11 days, threw up a shield charm over the press pen that was about 4 times bigger than any shield charm Harry had ever seen her cast, and lit up green silver at the edges, and Harry heard her shout, in genuine startlement, "Oh, thank you, Aurelius." And 41 brand new lords and ladies of ancient houses, 38 of whom had held a wand for less than a fortnight, did not run. Cecily Ashdown Cooper got in front of the public rope with her arms out and shouted, "Right, everybody, this way, no shoving, move!" in the voice of a district nurse on a Saturday night, and 300 people obeyed her instantly, because that voice has been obeyed since the dawn of time. Harry went for Voldemort. They met over the wreck of the fountain, and the first exchange took out the entire eastern wall of fireplaces. He was faster than at Stinchcombe. A fortnight of nothing but this, of Remus and Sirius and Grimsmaw hammering him in the long gallery at Ashdown until he stopped throwing power like a boy tipping a bucket. Voldemort was faster too, and the ruined hand had not slowed him a fraction, and his new wand was doing something Harry had never seen, splitting curses into pairs. "You gave it away," Voldemort hissed. Their spells locked between them, a hard white knot of light in midair, 6 inches from either face. 50 houses. In your hand. And you put them on a table. Yeah. Why? "Because they weren't mine," said Harry, "you absolute idiot," and headbutted him. It was not a delling technique. It was, Sirius said later, the single most Potter thing that had ever happened in a public building. Voldemort's nose broke, the spell lock detonated, and both of them went 20 feet in opposite directions. Harry hit the golden gates and slid down them and got up. Voldemort came out of the smoke laughing, blood on his mouth, and threw the killing curse 3 times in 2 seconds. And Harry took the first one on a slab of marble, dodged the second, and caught the third on his palm because his hands still remembered how even if the rings were gone. And then Cassius Vane arrived, and for about 90 seconds the battle stopped making sense. He came in through the atrium's east wall, not through the door in it, through the wall, which unmade itself in a neat oval as though it had been asked politely. And there were 5 of them, Vane in his summer coat with his cane, and 4 figures in gray behind him, and they were not wearing masks, which Harry realized later was the point. They had faces, ordinary ones, a woman who might have taught music, a man who looked like a bank manager. They walked into the middle of a war, and they did not look at Voldemort at all. "Mr. Pedza." "Potter," Vane called pleasantly over the noise. "Sorry, 2 of mine wouldn't be talked out of it. Now, well, you're distracted." The bank manager raised his hand, and something came off it that Harry didn't recognize, and he ducked, and the marble behind him didn't shatter. It emptied. It went gray and light and porous like a pumice stone. And Harry understood with a lurch of pure horror what a hollowing looked like from the outside. He put the bank manager through a wall with a piece of the fountain. The music teacher got a hand on his forearm. It was 2 seconds, maybe 3. It felt like a plug being pulled out of the bottom of him, a cold, sucking, sideways drag, everything he had running out through a hole in his arm, and his knees went, and somewhere very far away a great many voices that were no longer in his hands wailed wild, and a wandless, ringless, 79-year-old woman from Prague hit the music teacher in the side of the head with a ministry visitor's chair. The grip broke. Harry went down on all fours coughing, and the old woman stood over him with a chair and said something in Czech that was clearly extremely rude, and the music teacher, 210 years old, veteran of 6 Hallowings, turned around with her wand up and was hit simultaneously by a stunner from Cecily Ashdown Cooper, a bone-breaking hex from the lorry mechanic, from the busker in Cardiff that nobody ever identified and which took her clean off the floor. And spawned the pillow at Smite attacking the from Perthisabapaladief. "Stay down," bellowed Danny Wren at the top of his lungs to a woman who had been alive since the Georgians. Harry got up. He got up in the middle of the atrium of the Ministry of Magic with his ears ringing, and he looked around, and what he saw he carried with him for the rest of his life. 41 people who had been muggles a fortnight ago, standing in a rough line across the middle of the hall with their wands up. Not fighting well. Fighting badly. The barrister from Bath was shouting the incantation twice. One of the Frenchmen had his wand in the wrong hand. The boy from the fish shop was crying and casting at the same time. And they were standing in front of 900 people who were still getting out through the visitor's entrance. And they were not moving. 50 wands. 41, and Hermione's, and Sirius's, and Daphne's, and the Aurors coming down the stairs behind Amelia Bones and Dumbledore's white fire. And Cassius Vane standing alone in the wreck of his last 2 colleagues, looking at that line with an expression Harry had never expected to see on him. It was recognition. "Oh," said Vane. Harry saw him work it out. He saw 300 years of arithmetic run through the old man's face in about a second and a half and come out at a number he didn't like. "That's what it was for," Vane said. He wasn't talking to anyone. "That's what the seats were for. Voldemort killed him. There was no drama in it. A green light from behind, unremarked, from a man who had spent the last minute working out which of the various people trying to kill him was most inconvenient, and Cassius Vane, born 1698, folded up on the marble like a coat slipping off a chair and did not move again, and Harry felt the loss of him as a small cold shock in his tat that he had absolutely no idea what to do with. Tiresome, and Harry Potter lost his temper. Afterwards, there was a great deal of argument about what he actually did, and the Department of Mysteries took 11 months over the report, and the report was wrong. What he did was very simple. He'd been thinking about it for a fortnight, ever since a green torch lit in a bracket that had been cold since 1547, and Daphne had said the thing that started it. The Wizengamot doesn't grant seats, it recognizes them. And Hermione had said the other thing 3 nights ago in the library at 2 in the morning. Magic keeps accounts, Harry. That's the whole basis of the ledger. The instrument can't record a lie about blood. He walked out into the middle of the atrium and said, loudly enough for the whole hall, "Tom Marvolo Riddle." Voldemort's head came round. "Son of Moreau Purgant and Tom Riddle Sr. of Little Hangleton," said Harry. "No house, no seat, no ring, no name in the ledger of extinct lines because your mother sold the last of it for a wedding and died in a muggle orphanage under a name Cassius Vane didn't have." He raised his hand. "Empty. No wand in it. You've got nothing behind you. Not one dead grandmother's worth. I've got 50. "I have 7, Voldemort began and stopped. Everybody heard it. 900 people were mostly out of the hall by then. But the Wizengamot was still there, jammed in the corner behind Dumbledore's fire, and Amelia Bones heard it and Percy Weasley wrote it down. "Yeah," said Harry. "I know. and he brought his hands together for the second time in his life. It wasn't the wave that had dawned through Stinchcombe. It was narrower than that, and it was aimed, and it went across the atrium in a line 4 feet wide, and it took Lord Voldemort's body off the floor and through the golden gates and through the wall behind them and through the security desk and through the wall behind them and through the security desk and through the outer wall of the Ministry of Magic into the disused underground station beyond. And everything it passed through came apart. Harry walked after it. He walked through the hole in 3 walls with the dust boiling and came out into the dark of an abandoned tube platform, and the thing on the tracks was still moving. It was not a body anymore. It was doing the thing Harry had read about in the file, in one of Vane's cold field notes, and had hoped never to see, coming apart into something gray and thin and screaming, unhousing itself, because the anchor in Albania and the cup in a vault and the diadem in a room full of junk would not let it stop existing, no matter how thoroughly it stopped being alive. It went up the tunnel like smoke up a chimney, shrieking, and the shriek said something that might have been his name. Harry stood on the platform in the dark for a long moment. 6, he said. They found him sitting on the edge of the platform 20 minutes later with his feet hanging over the rails, and it was Daphne who found him, because of course it was. She had a cut over one eyebrow and about half her hair down, and she sat next to him without saying anything for a while, which Harry appreciated more than he could have said. 2 dead, she said eventually. A journalist and a bloke from flu regulation. 30-odd hurt. 6 of the new lords are in St. Mungo's, and Danny Wren's broken his wrist punching somebody, which he's very pleased about. A pause. It should have been 400, Potter. Yeah. It was going to be 400. He came into that room to make an example, and there were 50 wands in it, and he hadn't budgeted for 50 wands, because 11 days ago there were none. She turned her head. You know that, don't you? You know that's why. I gave them away because they weren't mine. I know. That's the point. That's the thing I've been trying to work out all summer, and I finally got it. Daphne Greengrass rubbed her eyes with the back of her wrist. You keep doing the decent thing and it keeps being the tactically optimal thing, and it is driving me completely round the bend because I have spent 9 years learning how to be clever and you just aren't, and it keeps working. I'm a bit clever. You head-butted the Dark Lord. That was tactical. It was not. It really was though, said Harry. He was expecting a spell. Daphne put her face in her hands and made a sound that echoed all the way up the tunnel. They sat there. Your dad was in the atrium, Harry said after a bit. I know. He got about 30 people out through the west grates before they went down. Percy Weasley's put it in the record. He watched a piece of ceiling dust drift past. For what it's worth, he did that before he knew whether I'd survive. I checked the times. Daphne didn't answer for a long moment. Astoria goes to Vienna on the 14th, she said. I know. I paid for it on Tuesday. Vane's money's been returned with a note telling him where to put it, which is going to be awkward now he's dead, but there we are. Harry shrugged. Your dad doesn't owe anyone anything, neither do you. You are aware, said Daphne in a very careful voice, that if you keep doing things like that, I'm going to have a completely unmanageable opinion about you. Yeah, said Harry. That's sort of what I was going for. She looked at him. He looked back. And then somebody up in the wreckage of the atrium shouted, "Have you found him?" in Ron Weasley's voice, and the moment fell over, and Daphne stood up and dusted off her robes and said, "In here, he's fine, he's being smug about a headbutt," and Harry laughed all the way up off the platform. They rebuilt the atrium in 6 weeks, and they got the ceiling wrong, and it's still wrong, and Hermione has written to them about it twice. The wand restriction repeal passed on the 8th of August, 79 to 61, and the noise in the public gallery when Percy read the countout was such that Amelia Bones had to clear it twice. Silverclaw, keeper of compacts, sat in the gallery through the whole debate with his hands folded and his face perfectly still, and afterwards, in the corridor, he said to Harry, "You put it to the floor. Told you I would." "Jess," said the goblin, "you did." And then he said something in gobbledygook, short 3 syllables, and would not translate it, and Grimsmaw refused to translate it either. And when Harry finally got it out of a very drunk goblin at a bank function 8 years later, he had to leave the room for a minute. Cornelius Fudge resigned on the 11th, having spent 8 days insisting that the attack on the ministry had been staged, and having been contradicted in print by 152 members of the Wiesengemot, 300 civilians, and a photograph of himself hiding under a bench. Dolores Umbridge did not resign, but her Hogwarts appointment quietly evaporated, and Harry considered that a fair trade. Vane's filing cabinet turned out to be 11 filing cabinets in a vault in Zurich, and Hermione went through them in 9 days, and on the 4th day she came out into the garden at Ashdown House where Harry was flying badly around the paddock with Ron and shouted. Harry was flying badly around the paddock with Ron and shouted, "Harry Nitton! Nitton Seventon! A cup!" And Creature wept in the kitchen when they asked him about a locket, and told them about Regulus, and Sirius sat down on the floor next to him and stayed there for a long time. There's a stone basin 2 miles under Charing Cross Road, with a crack across the middle of it and 50 pipes going nowhere. The goblins have opened the 50 doors at last, and there's nothing much behind any of them. And Silverclaw has decided the whole chamber will make an excellent wine cellar, on the grounds that a thing which held something stolen for 300 years ought to be made to do something cheerful. And on the 31st of July, 2 days after the atrium, Harry Potter turned 15 in a house with 40 acres and 30 bedrooms, and there were 61 people in it. And somebody's mobile cousin had brought a karaoke machine. And Cecily Ashdown Cooper made a speech that went on for 11 minutes and made Molly Weasley cry. Harry went outside at about midnight and sat on the fountain wall with a stone hair and looked at his hands. One ring. Plain iron. Ugly. On the little finger of his right hand. Peverell. 6, it said quietly, the way it had been saying it for a fortnight. Yeah, said Harry. I know. In the morning. Behind him, the house was full of light and terrible singing. And somewhere in the middle of it, Hermione Granger was arguing with a barrister from Bath about the statute of secrecy, and Ron was teaching a French lord to play Exploding Snap for money, and Sirius was on a table. Daphne came out with 2 glasses and sat down next to him without being asked. You're brooding. I'm thinking. You brood when you think. It's very tedious. She handed him a glass. 16 next year. What are you going to do about the other 6? Harry looked out at the dark valley, at 40 miles of Northumberland with nothing in it, and at a house that had been shut for 200 years and now had a karaoke machine in it. Find them, he said. Break them. All of them. And then, he turned the iron ring on his finger once. There's a 7th. And it lives about an inch behind my eyes, and I've got a fortnight's worth of ideas about that. And every one of them is terrible. Then we'll get better ones. Oh, don't be tiresome, Potter. Daphne clinked her glass against his. I've read the rolls 11 times, and I've got nothing else on.